Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him, of course, from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how was your travels, especially down to the Shrine Bowl?
Fantastic. I don't know. It's been a ton of travel. It's been crazy. I was at the beginning of I was basically traveling almost every weekend from the beginning of December all the way to the end of January, and then I'll be headed to the Combine. But that was nuts. But I had a ton of fun at the East-West Shrine Game. I had a ton of fun at the Senior Bowl. And I learned some players' names, which I think is really great for me.
I feel like that's the sort of thing that you could only get by being in person.
Yeah,
you definitely could not have. That's
why I write like the pieces about like why am I at the Senior Bowl?
Yep.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, you have to go there in person for sure.
That's absolutely not something you would get online. That's definitely not something you would get in a podcast for sure.
Correct. Yeah,
which we'll get into here in just a little bit. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. And before we begin, I just want to thank the people who listened to the last episode of Norse Code, where we were discussing if anyone listened to the show for my editing. I have just sent you an image with a screenshot of new reviews on iTunes.
What? We got reviews? That's crazy.
Some new reviews on iTunes where they specifically mention the editing. And I gotta tell you, I laughed so hard when this had been the
tallest podcast. This is amazing. Are we going to read these off? These are incredible.
Just a couple of these. My only complaint is they talk too much about the Vikings, stick to beekeeping, parenting advice, sumo, Arif's anime corner, etc. I tune in for James's, how shall I put this, interesting editing. But I stay for Arif's explanations of topics such as the Queen of England's blitz avoidance strategy. All it really needs more is Luke Braun. Yeah.
This is by far the longest running #1 Vikings podcast. Don't ask for a source. Everyone is saying this. The banter, football analysis, and most importantly, the editing are all outstanding. This is great. I don't think we had reviews for like over a year.
It was like a year or something. So, but I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated seeing that the other day.
Incredible work, everyone.
I was howling when I saw that. So thank you for making an old man feel useful very briefly. So with that, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We are going to do some Combine preview. Arif interviewed Thor Nystrom earlier today, and we're going to have him on to discuss a number of different ideas, a number of different prospects that you can look forward to in the coming weeks. So we've got that, and we've got a mailbag as well. But before we start again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us out financially, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription. You get access to the bonus episodes. New one should be out here this weekend. You get access to the Discord, of which Arif may be returning. It has been discussed. It has been foretold. His return.
We can't look. The future is unknown. You could die tomorrow. We can't make promises about what the future holds, but we've been in discussions.
I am making promises. Arif will be posting again on the Discord. It shall happen, or my good name will be sullied more than I have already sullied it myself. So check it out, patreon.com/NorseCode. Special thank you to two individuals, to Ethan Hartman. Thank you so much for supporting us. And Kate Brune, I may have missed you in a past episode. Just wanted to catch that real quick, just in case I had. Thank you so much, Kate, for signing up over on Patreon. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to give a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com for any number of wonderful pieces of Norse Code merchandise, t-shirts, baby onesies, posters, shower curtains. All of that is available on Threadless, and I don't get to do this very often. Threadless, and I want to make this perfectly clear. we make pennies on threadless purchases. It's not.
Yeah, it's not like an important revenue stream.
This is not how we buy laptops when they break or something. But it is always nice to see something come in, and it's always nice to see the merchandise sell. There is a code at the moment for like 20% off your order. You might want to check this, but norsecode.threadless.com is the website where our stuff is at. The code is all in caps GET and then the number 20. So GET 20 gets you like 20% off of your threadless purchase, including all of the stuff that is listed for Norse Code. So check that out. Hopefully that works for you. I tested it earlier and it seemed to have worked. So I would suggest giving that a shot. If you've been thinking about picking up the baby onesie or the t-shirt and just thought, $21 is a little bit too much, knock it down to 15. It works. So check it out. Get20 is the code you can use over on Threadless. So all of that aside, let's get into the interview that Arif conducted earlier today. This is with Thor Nystrom at Fantasy Life.
All right. I'm here with probably the world's biggest JJ McCarthy fan, Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Life. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. I feel like people have been bringing this one up a lot to you, but like that makes sense, right? Like you understand.
Yeah. I definitely do. This thing could go one of two ways because I see now that people in some ways associate me with JJ McCarthy, which will be really good if he's as good as I think he is, and.
It'd be real bad if he's not, man.
I might have to put my house up for sale if he's not, but I really think I'm right on this one, but we'll find out.
But yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I need some Prize Picks info from you, but B, you always seem to have kind of a good bead on kind of who's who heading into the combine. You've got a pretty good sense of which players are expected to perform well. You don't ever seem kind of disappointed when or surprised when a disappointing result comes out. And so you seem to have like a pretty decent understanding of kind of a depth of players and kind of their athletic potential here, which makes me wonder, is the combine even all that useful for someone like you?
It is in that, you know, for certain prospects, there are black boxes in their evaluation, and some of them have to do with athleticism. And so whether it is answering that question or, you know, in some instances, you can get someone who is, you know, for instance, you think on tape, their X speed and they're slower, you know, on their 40. And then it's, do we trust what our eyes, told us on tape, or do we trust the running there? But no, I mean, like fleshing that out and then getting the full athletic composite, you're going to get guys that essentially nullify their, you know, their own opportunity, or not their own opportunity, but they nullify the odds that they can have a long NFL career merely by their testing profile, you know, over the data and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's just another data point for sure. But Arif, getting those Prize Picks 40 combine props, that you have to put the show on for that alone, because that we shoot fish in a barrel there.
So what happens when you get kind of a result like that? When you get, I mean, I think some people have a pretty common answer for when there's a player that they think is fast who runs a slow 40. This is just like kind of the most, I mean, obviously we've got, you know, verticals and broads and agilities and stuff like that. But I think the most common example is like a player that we think is fast runs a pretty slow-ish 40, say a speedster with a bunch of 20-plus yard explosives that seems to be running away from his opponents, runs like a 4.52 or something like that. That feels kind of unusual. And then I think the more interesting thing is when the opposite happens. A player who looks pretty slow on film, gets caught from behind a lot, doesn't seem to get open when he's running deep routes, runs like a 4.39. What do you do in either of those circumstances?
Yeah, it's, you know, the scouting vernacular on it is you don't want to count it twice, but if you weren't counting it before, or if your understanding of a player's evaluation, if it has been change it all by those testing numbers, then it's incumbent on you to recognize that data that you're getting, right? Like you just want the full picture on it. And so when someone does contradict one of your assumptions or something you thought about their athletic profile, whether it's for the good or the bad, you have to acknowledge that in the way that you see them and in the way that you rank them. And a specific example of this, you were talking about hypothetically a runner that piles up a bunch of explosive runs that we expect to run well. RJ Harvey is who you're talking about from UCF. Now, RJ Harvey, he measured into the Senior Bowl 5'7" 3/4, 207 pounds. He plays more around like 212, so he's like a bowling ball kind of a guy. We had reports that he ran high 4.3s coming out of high school, and he piled up it was him and Genty who piled up the most explosive runs in this class. And so you think you're seeing that 4.3 speed, that high 4.3 speed on film. If RJ Harvey were to go out and run 4.51, that would really hurt him. It would really, really hurt him. Because he has to be that burner so that you can project some of those explosive runs to carry over to the NFL level.
Is there a concern with him that maybe, because you said that out of high school that was kind of apocryphally a speed that he had run. Is there a chance that he kind of runs like slower than a 4.45 or something like that?
For me, he looks high 4.3 speed on film, and you would see him running away from Big 12 defensive backs. So no, there's not necessarily, but it's just an example of someone where if they did sort of shock by running not as fast, you add 1/10 of a second onto that guy's 40 time in this running back class, that could be the difference of a round or a round and a half, right? Because we're so stacked after the second round, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, we're going to have really good UDFA running backs. So it's those running backs. We're going to have a track meet there in Indianapolis, and it's going to be a peacocking deal. Like there's so many dudes who are jockeying for position behind Ash and Genty. We have the free spot on the board. We had the free bingo, in the middle, whatever. Everyone else is jockeying for position there. So yeah, it's going to make for a fun couple days of testing.
Man, do you remember there was a bunch of TCU players? This was a long time ago. I'm Googling it right now. This is great live podcasting. But there was a TCU linebacker. He was kind of undersized. He came from Gary Patterson's. Paul Dawson. That's it. Yeah. He, at the time, seemed like he was undersized. A lot of people thought he would run pretty quick, at least faster than, 4.7, something in the 4.6s, hopefully in the 4.5s. He ends up running a 4.8 at his combine. Doesn't do any better at his pro day. And I just kind of want to know, and obviously he didn't have a very good career. He fell a little bit in the draft. I mean, the third round, it's not a huge fall for where he was originally projected to go, but some people considered him potentially a first round pick. But he fell a little bit in the draft. His workouts were poor. His agilities were actually kind of decent, but his workouts were poor. And then he didn't do anything in the NFL. Do you think that this was an instance where kind of something about the film kind of deceived us about his speed, and that was his actual speed? Was there something about maybe he just doesn't run a 40 very well because there's a technique to it, how you start and stuff like that. Like there's a technique to running a 40 that maybe complicates our ability to understand a player's true on-field speed. What happens, with him or with a player kind of like that?
Yeah, it's a good example of a cautionary tale and why sometimes there is a signal in that noise with that. Because I know, for the average person out there, you might want to, think like, oh, it's just a combine. Like, you can see these guys on film. Why does it matter what they run in their shorts? Well, Dawson is a good, he was a consensus first team All-American his last year at TCU because he was so active. He had, it was 100 something tackles. He had a bunch of interceptions, maybe 4 or 5 that year. He had a bunch of TFLs, but he was the undersized dude, and the game was all based on the idea that he was going to fly around, right? And that's what it had to be in the NFL for him to be, some level of what he was at TCU, and the fact that he was small in conjunction with lacking foot speed, as it turned out, they probably should have ended up falling lower than the third round in hindsight. But, obviously that was an example where, was it Seattle that took him or
Cincinnati? Cincinnati was on a rash of taking these linebackers that ran just awful 40s year after year.
Well, they got it with Burfict. But yeah, not all of them can come through, I guess. But yeah, I think that's probably an example where they were like, well, we love his film. We're going to, have conviction in the film. Who cares what he ran? And it turned out that data point mattered there.
Yeah, it looks like he didn't even hack it in the CFL. I've got his Wikipedia page up. He did end up with Seattle at one point, so he did kind of nail it a little bit. But then he goes to the CFL. He was on the practice squad there, got promoted to the active roster, and then got cut. So, something's up. Something was up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and what's kind of interesting about a player like Dawson is that he was playing in the Big 12 at the time, which was a conference that had a lot of speedy guys, and so you thought if you watched him that you could get some context for his speed. It wasn't that he was playing in a Group of Five or an FCS program. He's playing in a Power 5 program in a conference that had a decent amount of speed, and so it felt like maybe we got tricked somehow. How does that happen? Like, I know that you mentioned that sometimes the combine is a great equalizer and that the film isn't enough for us to go off of, but I am just really curious about what happens. Why can we be tricked by that?
Yeah, like we talk about this typically more with offensive players about being in a scheme that is going to facilitate video game numbers, and you can't all go on that. They used to, it's funny, like back in the day, they did this with air raid quarterbacks, and then the air raid quarterback would reach the NFL and they'd be like, oh, those stats don't matter. It's a gimmicky offense. That doesn't translate to the NFL. Till the NFL started to do the air raid concepts, they started to accept them a little bit more. But we acknowledge that offensive players, they can be. Malachi Corley from the last class would be an example where he's a glorified running back, but Western Kentucky, the way they ran their air raid to that slot receiver, they would give him a bunch of touches either behind the line of scrimmage or within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and then he'd break tackles of nickel defenders because he's a running back, right? But it's like, that dude's not really a receiver. Those stats, you can't really trust them. With the TCU defense, they ran under Gary Patterson all those years. It was this super duper aggressive 3-3-5. They did the 3-3-5 thing before the other colleges went to it. Patterson was sort of ahead of the game with that, but it's sort of you could send heat from any different direction, and then you could be dropping dudes back that the quarterback did not expect to be there, right? So it's like the principal was ramping up the heat on the QBs and then confusing them right away. And a different example. Remember Jeff Gladney? And when he was coming out, he had all these crazy stats, right? It wasn't just the PBUs and stuff like that. It was tackles for loss, and it was sacks like that you wouldn't see from other defensive backs. And people were like, "Oh man, Jeff Gladney, he causes all this, chaos." And you get in the backfield and you send him after the quarterback. Well, it turns out that some of that stuff was schematics, and certainly Dawson's statistical profile was in part that as well. Really hurrying up the process of the quarterback and making him make bad decisions. And I think I would have to go back and Dawson's film that last year, but I do remember it was either 4 or 5 interceptions. It was something like that. And he had a bunch of PBUs too. And I would have to imagine those were throws that were made within 3 seconds of this, and probably maybe more closer to 2, like quick decisions that were made. And he just happened to be in a spot the quarterback was not expecting.
It's awesome. I get you onto a podcast about the 2025 draft. I'm asking about the 2015 draft. It's perfect.
we can go deep in the GP bag. One of my all-time favorite stories from bowl season was this was. I mean, I would have to look up the. Actually, I'm gonna do it really quick.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
TCU played. I believe it was. It was Arizona State or no, or was it West Virginia? I forget, but anyway, they played. They were in a bowl. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was Oregon because Vernon Adams was the quarterback.
Of course,
and me and 3 of my buddies were at Shep's in Brainerd, and we get to halftime, and it was like me and my one buddy are like true sicko degenerates, and the other 2, they'll watch college football, but at halftime the score it was something like 31-0 or 35-0 Oregon. And then at halftime, so Gary Patterson had been wearing a purple shirt. He changes into a black shirt at halftime, and TCU roars back and wins the game. And everyone was saying, oh, it's because GP changed his shirt at halftime. And meanwhile, my buddies, the other two, they had said, let's start playing pool. They want to play pool and they want to play darts. And me and the one guy were like, no, game ain't over. Like, we're going to close this one out. And we got to see the wildest comeback ever. We still bring that up to those two guys of like, the game wasn't over and you guys don't know ball. But the story of that game, if you look it up, you'll see people say Gary Patterson changing his shirt. What no one recalls from that game, you know who got injured right before halftime? Mr. Vernon Adams, the star quarterback for Oregon. So they put in the backup, and they couldn't move the ball anymore. Right? And so TCU roars back, but everyone says the black shirt that Gary Patterson was wearing. It was so epic.
I knew I could get an old irrelevant college story out of you. It didn't take any time. It was 14 minutes. Yeah,
it was so good. Yeah, the under got there.
Let's talk a little bit about this draft. So I remember last year I asked you kind of, who is going to surprise, and I think you mentioned to me that, Xavier Worthy was going to go for the record. And I was like, man, not everybody can go for the record all the time. And you got it. That was a great moment. We got to be in the stadium. Fans were in the stadium. We got to watch like him just go off and celebrate. That was awesome. Is there anyone that's going to be able to surprise? Obviously, the event, the 40, is the big one. But is there anybody that, maybe bench press, maybe vert, maybe broad, maybe agilities, is really going to kind of shock people? I don't mean like people known to be fast that'll run fast, but people that might surprise, like Jonathan Taylor did when he ran in the 4.3s, and everyone was like, what in the world? Turns out he always had it. Is there anybody like that this year, do you think?
There's one guy that I don't think people expect him to run this fast, but he's going to. So if this qualifies, the cornerback Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, who we saw down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, I've been told by reliable sources he is consistently running 4.2s in training.
4.2s?
In the 4.2s, he is flying. So he had a really good Senior Bowl as well. Maxwell Hairston is a cornerback to watch out for, like a potential riser. Because if he indeed goes out there and drops a 4.27 after the Senior Bowl he had, and he's coming off a good season too at Kentucky, that is a guy who's going to start to fly up boards. So then that's what we think we're going to get is in the 4.2s. So
was he a Feldman freak? Is he on that list?
I would have to check if he was this past year. This info was not from, although the Feldman freak list, it's surprising how little the books, the Prize Picks and Underdog, how little they investigate publicly available data for the 40. The reason it's shooting, fish in a barrel for me is I have numbers on some of these guys. I have the Blesto and the NFS numbers that, at least were reported to those services from their last known runs, some of these different kids. But I also have gone, researched these guys. And when there's publicly available 40s, I add those to my sheet. And then it gets really unfair when you're at the combine. You can literally ask the guy at his podium, hey, tomorrow, what are you going to run? And if he's being cagey, oh, well, what were you running at the end there at training? And if that doesn't work,
then you take the over.
There's a lot of agents around there as well that are perfectly happy to let you know what their clients are running. I have another story. I was about to say the names. I definitely should not say the names, but
okay. Hold on. While you figure out how to anonymize it, I did pull up the freaks list. There are no players from Kentucky on it, so that is information that you acquired without cheating.
Yeah. So if anyone out there, if they drop Maxwell Hairston on those props and it's even in the 4.3s, I would suggest going under. And I can guarantee you Prize Picks does not know how fast Maxwell Hairston is. But so this story, this is probably, man, this is more like 5 or 6 years ago. But there was a big, crazy athletic linebacker from a big school, and he was supposed to test really well. And I got introduced to his agent at as it turned out, at one of the bars that you go to like afterwards.
Right.
And I brought up to him where this guy was listed for the 40 with the, I said, did you know, your client X that he is listed? I think it was he must have been at like 4.45 or no, maybe it was 4.4 flat. And so I told this, and he scoffed and he goes, "Yeah, right." And I pulled out the app and showed him. And so he looks at me, he rolls his eyes, and he goes, "Thor, a 250-pound body is not able to run faster than that number. It's not possible." He said, "My client's a freak of freaks," but he said it's literally not scientifically possible. Let's just say when I left the bar that night, I was like, "Well, okay, we're going over that number," So
look, I love my guy, but
yeah, well, that's exactly right. Like, and I've and the next day, or whenever that dude ended up testing, he, it was like it was like 0.05 above that number, 0.06. So it wasn't like it was like crazy up, but it was like, he had not run under that number one time in hundreds of the training, runs that they do. Because whether you're at Exos or whether you're at one of these other training things, that's what they've been doing the last month or whatever. It's like you just go there and you're in your short, you're running, you're training for that. They're showing you how to be more efficient on the 3-cone and the short shuttle. Like some of those guys who have destroyed those agility tests, they'll say all right after it, like, yeah, I just had really good training. Like I sucked at this thing when I started, but like there's a way you can do the angles and stuff to cut off time.
Yeah.
Like that world is pretty fascinating, but there's some people that are really, really good at training it. And because of that, we have ample data on most of the prospects, which hopefully PrizePicks does not go to the effort of finding. Yeah.
Well, I'm really curious about this too. If we have like a bunch of run-to-run data for, let's say somebody's training with Exos, just to choose like the biggest name in the game, and they run a lot. They always log kind of the first time they run a 40 what it's going to be like, because it's really good advertising for future clients to see what their end time run is. So you get a lot of runs in there. I can't imagine if an NFL team asks an agent for all those times that the agent wouldn't furnish that data to the NFL team. And then I have to imagine, well, if I've got 20 runs that are timed, that are a progression, so I can see how this guy continues moving up the progression, which might even suggest some level of coachability too. Isn't that more useful data than what like actually happens at the combine? Just for an NFL team, not for us. Obviously, we're not always going to have that. But like, if I'm an NFL team, why wouldn't I ask for that?
Yeah, especially if a run was like way worse than you thought it would be, right? Like some guys, because you only get 2, and sometimes people just get they're slow off the block and maybe in training they were, they didn't have that issue. So yeah, like as a thing to back check, especially, when your opinion of what you saw on tape is so different than the number you got, I'm sure that's done. Yeah, of like, your client ran 0.2 of a second, slower than I thought he would. Like, what was up with that? And yeah, the agents are happy to provide information that is going to make teams see their clients in a more advantageous light.
All right, so we got Maxwell Harrison. Is there anybody that everyone kind of sees as a speedster that might run a little slower than we thought?
I'm not sure if there's someone like I could point to in advance, like not like I got that piece of intel. I'm not sure if there's one guy where I can tell you for sure, like I can with Harrison. Harrison will run faster than everybody thinks. Like, I don't know if I got one for like the slower one.
Sure. And then when we like talk about these combine metrics, I know like every year people talk about like, hey, this metric matters for this position and stuff like that. And I've got my own kind of data that suggests that some of these metrics matter more for other positions and stuff like that. But everyone kind of comes at it with their own data sets and their own models and their own kind of approach to it. What kind of workouts matter the most to you and at which positions?
This is a great question. I could go through every one and
look, man, we got time. I don't care.
Yeah, hell, like with some of the positions, you cut it off at a certain size, and above that, certain tests matter, and below it, other tests matter. So, for instance, running back threshold size is considered 215, although the NFL has gotten a little bit a little bit smaller.
This
and a
is
little
so
bit
great.
faster.
You're the only other person I know who does this. My running back threshold size is at 209.5. So
Okay. Awesome.
yeah, this is perfect. No, keep going.
So I actually switched my threshold thing in my sheet to 210 because of this, because it's getting, I was like, I can't do 215 no more. I gotta bump it down to 210. But the running backs under 210, yeah, look at us. Under 210. These are the tests that I care about for them. 3-cone, right? You're an airback. You have to be able to make people miss. That is a super duper important test for you. 40 matters to an extent for the airbags, but I don't go too far with it, right? Like there's only so many times you're gonna be able to access your top speed, especially that goes in conjunction with the agility a little bit. And then speed score, I would say a little bit. Speed score matters a little bit too for the running backs that are over that size. But I care more about the 40 for those bigger backs. I want to know how they convert speed to power and sort of what we're working with there. And then the jumps matter to me more for those guys too, because I want to know the explosion, the acceleration, and then how quickly can we get to top speed? What is your top speed at your size? And then how does that sort of go against the other dudes? With receiver, I cut it off. It's a height thing, right? It's like the dudes, and 6 feet is an easy one there. Mm-hmm. But like the guys under 6 feet, the 40, you have to run fast if you're going to be a short receiver in the NFL, more or less. And then the vertical jump, I care about a little bit too, just the quick acceleration. And then the guys above that, I care more about their jumps, more of sort of the power there. The broad jump for the guys, that are over 6 feet, and the speed score as well. Tight end, 40, 3-cone. Offensive tackle is an interesting one. Like the testing data can get a bit jumbled there. The thing that is shown to have the most accuracy, it's actually, funny enough, it's speed score for the offensive tackles. It's just putting together how big you are, and then, of course, with your 40, but that is shown to have some predictive value there, along with the broad jump. Whereas for interior offensive line, the thing that's important, it's the agility stuff. So the 3-cone. What was the team? I think it was the Colts, where and the Colts and the Packers, they both fetishize that same thing of like their offensive line sleepers. If you look at them over the like a decade period, they were just grabbing the dudes who were like off the radar that were going to go on day 3, who had the best agility scores, the best 3-cones. And that's how they were trying to pick off sleepers, and they got them, right? Like 4 or 5 years ago, Danny Pinter had maybe the best 3-cone of the interior offensive, and maybe all the offensive linemen. Green Bay did this over and over again. Now, it doesn't work every time, right? Like Jason Spriggs is out there somewhere being like, well, it didn't work for me. But there,
yeah, he had the 1 year that he was decent 1 year.
1 year, exactly. But yeah, like the Zach Tom kid is a great example of this as well, right? Like those organizations, they look at that, and that's what you should be doing. But and then you go to defense.
Hold on. I do want to talk about the offensive line just a little bit more, just because I find this one interesting. Because my research has found that for offensive tackles, broad jump does matter. Not like dispositively. It's one part of like maybe 2-3 part equation, and the other part of the equation for me is 3-cone, which I just find it interesting that it kind of matches you. But what I found kind of fascinating is that for the interior offensive lineman, you talk about agilities. Josh Norris has focused entirely on, especially for all the offensive linemen. I think it's a little bit less important for tackles, the short shuttle, but the guards and the centers. I found that short shuttle kind of matters a lot. And obviously these are highly correlated, right? If you're good at the short shuttle, you're probably going to have a good 3-cone. So we might just be looking at the same signal in different ways. But size adjusted short shuttle is really great for guards. Pure short shuttle is really great for centers, which is what I found. So to see kind of like a lot of very similar approaches using different, I think, methods of data analysis, I think is kind of interesting. But the second thing is, how important is it to get a guy kind of in quote unquote the right system? Because, we're both data guys, but also we both really kind of respect the way film analysis works. I know you do a lot of film analysis. When we talk about somebody like a Drew Dahlman or a Garrett Bradbury, these undersized, really just cat quick centers, we talk about them as like zone only centers that can really only run block in outside zone style schemes. And we saw like the Rams, draft those guys forever. What was his name? Jake Brendel, I think.
Yeah.
Similar kind of guy. I don't even know if he got drafted. He might have been an undrafted free agent, but like crazy good short shuttle, ended up playing for them for a little bit. Is that kind of a consideration when you're taking a look? Because obviously you put together a big board. I put together a composite big board, and none of these take into account system fit. And for players that might be particular system fits, do these kinds of approaches where we say, hey, that athletic score is really good, does that kind of paper over the importance of that? Or do teams and analysts over focus on system fit?
It's probably my biggest frustration with presenting it as a big board, because to your point, the GMs that do this, they have a offensive system, they have a defensive system, they have holes that they have to fill, and they at those position groups, they know those systems, and those coaches are looking into players that are fits for that, etc. So you can juice your own board in that way. Whereas, to your point, we have to do it in a vacuum, right? Like we just have to list them out 1 through 500. We don't have an offensive scheme. We don't have a defensive, sort of anything like that. So I basically just try to like bring everything to even with that, because there are players where if they find the right system, they could be solid. And if they don't, they're probably going to be busts. I think a good high profile example of this from the last class would be Bo Nix. He found his destiny with Sean Payton. That's a system that he could run well. If he had gone to a couple other teams and then they're tossing him out right away, I think there could have been problems there, right? Like if he had gone to the Titans, all right, and it's like, all right, Bo, win us 10 games. I do not think that would have gone very well. But yeah, I mean, like you can't really, in your rankings, you just have to sort of neutralize that. But yeah, certainly some players are going to overachieve just because of the circumstance situation they got in, and then vice versa. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right, let's talk about the defensive line, where it feels like the workouts matter. Well, maybe not nose tackle, but it feels like on the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the ball, the workouts matter more than at any other position. Am I right or wrong about that?
Definitely right. Yeah, I mean, like those big guys, like at that. I mean, just think about it. Like over. How many people are on Earth? 7 billion now, something like that. We're getting close. Yeah. How many of those 7 billion people are males between the age of 22 and 34 that are 300 plus pounds and can move like on our athletic freaks? You're talking about such a low percentage of the population. And once you get into there with the NFL, where it's like every single play, you're going to be going up against one of them. Right. Like the athleticism, it really starts to matter there. Right. Like, the margin for error has shrunk so small. That's why some of these lead-footed linemen, they don't make it, even if they have, colossus power, because you go to the NFL now, all of a sudden you're a one-trick pony. Those athletic freaks and the game planning that week and the scouting report that they're giving on you, they're going to be able to handle the one pitch you can throw, right? It's the same thing in baseball. If you could throw 105 miles an hour, but you couldn't do anything else, you're going to be a pitching machine. You're going to give up a lot of home runs. There's going to be a lot of guys in the back of the batter's box that are weight on their heels. They're going to swing for the fences every time. So it's super duper important. The one that I really care about for both the big defensive linemen and then the dudes that I'm, sort of projecting as 3 technique, the cutoff here, you could put it anywhere between 305 to 312, somewhere in there. I sort of ballpark 310. But the 3 cone is important for both groups, the big ones and the small ones. That short, in the phone booth agility, super important for that position. The smaller ones, the gap shooters, the penetrators, the three technique dudes, speed score is what I care about there beyond the three cone. So for those guys, those are the two tests. It's three cone and then speed score. And then with the bigger dudes, the bigger interior defensive linemen, the shuttle is the other one for me. That I found the data has, speaks to something. So it's both the agility for them, but I don't care as much about, for instance, the jumps. Speed score, it matters a little bit, I think, for the bigger DTs too, but like both the agilities for them are of the primary importance.
I was just taking a look at my defensive tackle sheet, and I'm trying to look at where my split is. I feel like I've got like an old sheet up because I had a better split somewhere else. But I think it was at 315, 314, something like that, which I might have to tighten that one down a little bit down to like
NFL's getting smaller, Arif.
NFL's getting smaller.
You got to toggle down a couple pounds.
But we've mentioned speed score a couple of times. I know what it is, you know what it is, but not everybody who's listening may know what it is. You don't have to like explain the equation, but Bill Barnwell found it. Can you tell me kind of what it is, kind of broadly?
Yeah, I mean it's how fast are you with your size, right? Like you're putting the two things together. That's probably the easiest way I could say it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, you take the was it the size times a certain number over the 40 time to a certain power, right? So it's like weight times 200 over 40 time to the fourth power, which seems arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
But there's some pretty good. Barnwell only used it for running backs and found it was pretty good for running backs until this always kind of happens with data. You find out kind of something cool or interesting, you publish it, and then everybody who kind of meets this threshold starts failing. And so he published it like, I think it was like right after Darren McFadden's rookie year. For people unfamiliar, Darren McFadden was like a speed score god. And very soon after, like people like Niall Davis got drafted, and it's just like it wasn't working out for them for a while because they kept on getting hurt. But it's been useful actually at a lot of positions, because one of the important things that we have to do is we have to adjust these workouts for the size that the player is. And I found, and you can kind of validate or caveat this however you want, but I found that a lot of these metrics, not all of them, because sometimes how far you move down the field in a certain amount of time matters no matter what size you are. But for a lot of them, they improve in their predictive capacity once you account for height, weight, or both. For sure.
Yeah. And you have to get the size in there somehow for it to have any meaning, because, it's the reason that we have the cutoffs at these positions, right? Like, it's not two interior defensive linemen if one of them is 288 pounds and the other one is Kenneth Grant, right? Like you're sort of judging two different things. But yeah, adding the size in with that, for instance, the speed score one, where the two inputs, it's the weight and then the 40 time, you're adjusting it for the size. Kent Lee Platt, I've had a lot of talks with Kent Lee Platt about this. And I don't want to come off as like harassing Kent Lee Platt. I think Kent Lee Platt likes me. Still, but I bug him every time I see him about various things. And one of them is and for people that don't know,
for people unfamiliar, yeah, okay, you're about to do it,
yeah. Kent Lee Platt's the guy that invented the RAS scores. And since we don't have the Spark anymore, it's like the show in town. So we're always waiting when the guy runs, they their athletic testing, what is their RAS score? When Jordan Davis, when he got done and Kent put out the thing of he got the perfect 10, because that's what, it's on a scale 10 to 0. Every player at that position group that has come out since 84, like 86 or something, like, so that Ken has the data back to. But yeah, like what I've talked with him about is the way that he includes the size and how he does it. It's like, it's either 10 or 15%, I think, for weight, and then height it's another input. maybe it's 10 for that, or maybe it's 5. But like it's counted sort of as a separate, right? Like, of the tapestry of your RAS score, and then like your percentiles with in the vert, the broad. He does the 40, your split, maybe 2 splits. He counts. He definitely does a 10-yard one.
He does 10, and I think he just. Well, 22. We're on the internet right now, so.
Yeah.
But I thought he did 10, 20, and 40. Anyway, keep on with your criticism of one of the most beloved.
So maybe it's 7 different. If there's 2 splits, it would be 7 different testing inputs, right? You have the 2 for explosive. That's your 2 jumps. You have your 2 for agility, 3 cone, and the shuttle. And then I believe.
Yeah, and then he does 40, 20, and 10. Yeah.
Okay, so you have 3 different ones for speed. Well, those are accounting for the other, whatever it is, 70 to 80%, whereas the size is the other stuff. What I've been curious about with Ken is, you do it as a separate thing. Could you make each one of the tests, could you size adjust those, right? So they're baked in on every single one, and the percentile you're getting, it's essentially a speed score, but for each test, right? Like it's like your vertical, it's you are combining it with your your weight or whatever, and then your percentile comes out. Now, I'm not smart enough to be able to do this. That's why I bug Kenley Platt about all of it. Like, is this possible? Like, are we, it's like a child going up to, the calculus teacher, and would it be possible if we could, Kent's like, get this guy away from me, and, but yeah, no, he has told me that he has another system for doing it that is way more similar to that, where each of the tests is being size adjusted. But he had some sort of reasoning for why he does it the way that he does. I'll keep bugging. I'll see him at the combine. Don't
worry about it. My post combine piece last year was something like, "Hey, here are the players that were interesting to me, and also why I don't use RAS scores." And it's actually exactly the criticism you outlined. Yeah. Again, I love Kent. We hung out a little bit at the shrine, so no like harsh feelings or anything like that. I was just like, hey, this is kind of my issue. One of those was I would say improper size adjustments, because when I was like looking at the data, I did find that if you ran a slower 40 at a particular size, you did get a slightly higher score in your RAS score for your 40, right? Because so like for people unfamiliar, he produces a card, and in the card you get a 0 to 10 score for each of your data points. And so you get a 0 to 10 score for your height, your weight, for your arm length, and then for your 40 time, 20 time, your explosion, whatever. Each one gets a 0 to 10 score. And when I looked at the 40 times, I found that players at the same position with different 40 times would have different RAS scores for those 40 times that were impacted a little bit by their size. But I have the same criticism. I created a hypothetical player, 290 pounds, a defensive tackle, that ran a 4.19 40-yard dash, right? And had an 11-foot broad jump and had a 6.65 3-cone and all of that, right? The best scores ever at the position at 290 pounds. And he did not have a 10.0 RAS score.
Because he got dinged too much for being 290, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, you can't look, these are edge cases, but like you can't be doing that.
Yeah. It's a great example. Yeah, there are limitations to it. And again, I'm not smart enough to know if you did it for each one, what would that jive it, or would there be other unintended things? I don't know. I'm just the dude asking the question, but I mean, I do think it'd be worth looking into. The other thing that if Kent's listening to this, he's like grinding his teeth right now. That, at the Senior Bowl, because one other thing that I'm curious about is that. And Ken says he doesn't like this either. So but it's just something he hasn't figured out how to work around yet. Mm-hmm. But like, for instance, in the case of Jordan Davis got the perfect 10. He was, 345 pounds. He weighed in whatever it was, and 6'5" or 6'6" or whatever he was. And then I believe he did the jumps and the speed stuff, but I believe he skipped the agility. He skipped something. I'm pretty sure it was the agility.
Oh, Jordan Davis didn't do the agility, you mean?
Jordan Davis,
Something
yeah.
Like yeah.
What did I say?
Well, no, you just said he, and I didn't know if you meant
I'm
Kent
sorry.
Skip the agility.
Yeah.
But no, Kent does good data entry. I don't want to. But Jordan Davis skipped the agility.
Yeah, Jordan Davis I'm sorry. Jordan Davis skips the agility drills, but he gets the perfect 10 because the way the system is, they don't give a penalty for that. And so I've asked Kent before, can we either get a penalty baked in, or can we group them in two different ways? The guys that did all the tests, you have a true score. And then, because my thing is, if you're skipping a test, you obviously suck at it, right? Like, why did Hakeem Butler not do the 3-cone? Because he changes directions like the Suez Canal tugboat, right? Like, he wasn't going to do that. But he had a, friggin' 5 RAS or whatever, right? Because he was huge and he ran fast, and he had a couple of decent jumps. Can we penalize? Well, Ken says he can't penalize because there's guys that aren't doing certain tests. Let's say that he pulled his hamstring on a run, so then he couldn't do the test after that. Or, there's examples of it where Ken doesn't want to be punitive to those guys. But so then I was thinking, well, can we group them in two separate groups? The guys who have the partial testing and the full testing, or can we put a marker on them? We put a scarlet letter on them of you skip.
Scarlet letter.
You skip 2 tests. You don't get the full. You got the half 10. You got a 10, but it's with the group that skipped tests. And maybe in the future, we'll see. I probably need a couple more times. Chopping it up with old Kent. I love talking to Kent, so I hope this doesn't come across as criticizing because I love talking about this stuff, but it is interesting.
No, for sure. I mean, so the way that I've approached that, and I find it interesting because Jordan Davis had such a good 10 split, one of the best 10 splits we've ever, regardless of size, one of the best 10 splits we've seen at the defensive tackle position, which typically correlates reasonably well, not outstandingly well, but like reasonably well with these agilities. And typically what I've done is I have found the test that correlates maybe if they're only missing like 1 or 2 key tests. And here I don't have a score for Jordan Davis. So I'm looking at my updated sheet. By the way, it was at 309.5, so I have been on top of it. That's what the split was. Don't worry about it. But I'm taking a look at it, and I don't have a score for him because I don't have an agility score, and even for a big guy. So I know that my agility score just matters a lot less at the nose tackle position versus like a 3 technique, which I don't know if that's what you found in your look at the data, but that's kind of what I found is that if I do that, it matters a little bit less for him. When I input in his scores, let me take a quick look. Hold on. My Excel just froze because this is all of the combine data going back to 2005. When I input in his scores, and he didn't do a bench either, so I have to like just put, and that one doesn't matter as much to me. I don't really care. But like, that is a small component, so I'll just put in like a dummy score. But when I input in like, prediction scores for him, it ends up being very high. He has one of the highest scores, in my data, but it's not like JJ Watt when JJ Watt, one of the best interior defensive line scores I have in my data. Dontari Poe is up there too. And the problem, of course, I have is that this suggests that somebody like Jordan Davis, who is a 0.1 percentile athlete, I don't want to suggest that he's not, but when you're picking at the top of the draft, these distinctions matter. It would suggest that, he's as good as athletically anyway as a Dontari Poe, right? Which my data suggests is actually not the case, right? Yeah. He's not like, and sometimes my data suggests that that the Packers probably should have put Lucas Van Ness on the inside instead of an edge player, but JJ Watt or I'm taking a look here, Jason Jones, 2008. That's crazy. Calais Campbell is up there as one of the highest scores we've ever had for an interior player. Milton Williams, who's about to hit free agency, he's got one of the highest scores ever. And then for these bigger guys, I'm taking a quick look.
Milton Williams about to be a Viking.
Milton Williams?
I'm hoping so.
That would be very fun.
Yeah.
Having an interior pass rush at all would be kind of exciting. Man, I've got Gervon Dexter here as a nose tackle because of how big he weighed in it. Sometimes you have to manipulate the data a little bit. But yeah, like Bobby Brown, who I think was picked up. Was it undrafted free agency by the Rams a little bit ago? Or Nick James, like as 310 pound, Carl Davis from Iowa. These are similar athletes to Jordan Davis, but they didn't get a 10.0 RAS score just because Jordan Davis benefited from not having to do like the agilities, right? So I wonder if like estimating the data is actually the best approach when you're producing this, because I think estimating the data, either giving them the average score or choosing a middle point between average and wherever the other scores are, just in terms of RAS, is a more fair way to do it.
I think so. Yeah, it's like, if only some guys get to take off their worst thing and they're not penalized at all for it, but then other guys are doing all the tests and you're still counting their worst stuff. Like, you either have to do it like you're saying to sort of fill in the pothole, or the other way to do it, I'm definitely not suggesting this, but the only other fair way to do it would be to yank out the worst scores that the other guys have, right? And then you definitely can't do it that way. So doing it the way that you're suggesting, I feel like that's the only fair way, as opposed to being like, oh, Jordan Davis is the most athletic interior defensive lineman to enter the NFL since the mid 1980s, whatever it was. Like you're suggesting, that's only the case because you're not penalizing him for the test that he skipped. And there ought to be something baked in there, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's also kind of curious because at this point we've been using, and we've got a lot of other positions to talk about, but this stuff is just fun to me. We're also kind of using it as its like own little award, right? Like at some point it kind of escapes the realm of trying to figure out who the best NFL player is and just being like, hey man, this guy's a crazy Jerick McKinnon is like a really good example of that. It's like, hey, this guy's like a crazy good athlete. I don't know if he's going to be any good at running back. Jerick McKinnon didn't technically play running back, but like he's one of the best athletes we've ever seen. And that's like fun on its own. And so at some point we kind of like give an award for most athletic player using RAS score. And it's like, well, if we're doing that, obviously the main thing is the main thing. We're primarily trying to figure out if he's a good player. If he's not doing agilities at a position where agility matters, then, that's its own issue. But like, we can't call him the best athlete there, right? Because he didn't do all the things.
Correct. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Let's move to talk about edge rushers.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna have some good ones in down there in Indy. Interior defensive line class is better, but we got some good ones up at the top. Obviously, everyone talks about Abdul Carter. Georgia has sent a couple good ones again off the conveyor belt. Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker is like a hybrid edge off-ball linebacker guy. It's like he's just a quarterback pest. You either send him off the edge when you're rushing him, or else he QB spy him from the linebacker position, or have him go sideline to sideline and gets the running backs. But
you're talking to a Vikings podcast that sounds a fair amount like Anthony Barr or Ivan Pace.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. It's the downhill guy. Yeah, and they can, he can do it the sideline to sideline as well, but I don't want to send him back in coverage. Mm-hmm. It's just the coming forward thing, but he's really, really good at it. That we got the Ohio State kids that seem to be interestingly getting overlooked just a little bit, just, in the wash here, but Sawyer and JTT, I'll be interested to see how they test, right? Like I think Sawyer, he's rated a little bit lower than some of these dudes who he all played the last couple of years. I think there's an anticipation, that he's not going to test it quite as well. He could certainly change that narrative. JTT, I thought, played like JTT had all this hype, and then I thought he had a great season. He was tremendous in the college football playoff. Seems like he's getting slept on a little bit. There's at the top there with the edge class. There's a lot of really good players. So they're going to be jockeying for position. I think the guy to watch out for there that could blow the roof off the place is Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, who's he's a shade over 6'5". He's 281. He has a wingspan of nearly 7 feet. He's just this long levered Inspector Gadget type guy, and he's twitchy as hell. But he, at A&M, he has the Danielle Hunter question coming out of LSU, where it was like, you're
the sacks.
Exactly. You're a physical freak. You had the requisite pressure rate that we would have expected from a physical freak like yourself, and yet you had no sacks. He had a little bit more than the 0 that Danielle did his last year, but it was like 2.5 or something. And it's like, bro, how are you that gifted? And you only had 2.5. But he was causing all kinds of havoc in Mobile, and he's going to test crazy at that size. And at that point, you're going to lock yourself into the first round. I think there's a lot of similarities there between him and Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary was another guy who had all the gifts in the world, and in college, the production sometimes wouldn't be there. So I think there's a lot of similarities there. And it's a guy, be scheme versatile, and you can move him up and down the line, do different stuff with Shamar Stewart.
Yeah, I was talking to someone today, actually. I was like, I have no idea what's going on in this year's draft. But at some point we got around to like discussing JJ Watt, because they just happened to have been watching like some 2014 JJ Watt film, and they're like, hey, Arif, do you know that JJ Watt like had like broken PFF's grading system? And I had to explain, no, he didn't, but like basically, yes, he did. He outstanding, 2012, 2013, 2014 seasons of the Houston Texans. And I was like, yeah, we had an earlier conversation actually about how important athleticism is to some of these kind of 4 technique, 5 technique players like JJ Watt, who had some of the best testing we've ever seen at 290 pounds. Then he says, well, if you wanted to look for some really good 290-pound players, there's a guy in this year's draft. I had no idea who's in this draft, right? But I had been to the Senior Bowl, so I was like, is it Shamar Stewart? And luckily for me, I was right.
Yes.
Would it be fair to be like, hey, we've got some expectations of this guy at 280, 290, where he could test like a Watt? I'm not saying career comparison fairness. I'm just saying athletic testing comparison.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's going to test up there with anybody. It's just such a freaky physical package there. So yeah, I mean, he could approach that. Now, if we're wrong on this, that's where the evaluation could go the other way with Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for him,
that's like all he has, right? So if he doesn't have that, then like, what are we gonna? What would be his calling card? That would be really tough.
That's exactly right. Like if you're Shamar Stewart, you're trying to whittle the questions on your evaluation down to 1. And that is the sack thing, which he can answer that, right? Like he could say, well, I signed in the most historic defensive line recruiting class that has ever been in college football. Jimbo Fisher signed the best defensive line class we've ever seen. I think he got 5 or 6. It was either 5 or 6 of the top 10 defensive linemen in one class. That was the class where Walter Nolan was in it. Anyway, they just had a whole bunch of dudes, but he might say, he could answer it, that the players around me, the scheme, like whatever. He could at least address that. Whereas if you don't come in and test athletic, now you have a really big question there. It's like, bro, you didn't have the sacks. You're not the athletic package that we thought. You have a good frame. You have versatility. We like the way that you looked at Mobile, but that's where you're a day 2 pick, right? But yeah, he's one of those guys heavily dependent on the testing, but we expect it to be real good.
By the way, I was able to pull up just the nose tackles in my testing, and there's like 3 names at the top here. One, it didn't make an impact in the NFL, but also he's like 400 pounds, and so my testing numbers got thrown off just because it was too aggressive in terms of the size comparison. But 2 of these guys are some of the best athletic testers we've ever seen. One played for the Vikings, and one played for a different team in purple. Can you name the 2 nose tackles? By nose tackles, I just mean over 310 pounds. My
Pierce?
testing goes all the way back to 2005, so
Pierce?
it's pretty broad. What's that?
Pierce?
No, although Pierce did test really well.
Do I got the right team?
Dude, there's only 2 teams in purple, man. Of course you got the right
I was trying to think.
team.
You might have to give it to me.
Well, okay, I'll give you the one of the team that you're trying to get. Haloti Ngata.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Can you get the Viking?
Give me the specifications one more time.
Over 310 pounds, one of the best testing for a nose tackle specific testing data. I'll give you a clue.
Okay.
He's from Haiti. Drafted in 2010, not by the Vikings.
Wait, but how did the Vikings come and play?
He was a Viking.
Oh,
He just
okay.
wasn't drafted by them. Come on, bud.
I give up.
It's Linval.
Oh, sure, yeah. Our boy Linval.
You got the scoop and score somehow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what workouts matter to you at the edge position?
At edge, let's see where our cutoff is with this one. Edge, I'm like at 270, low 270 cutoff there. And the ones under, the speed matters for them probably the most, and then 3-cone as well. And then I got broad jump on both, but speed 3-cone for the smaller ones, which makes sense. And then the bigger War Daddy type edges, the jumps are at the top of mine for that of the most important, the explosion.
That tracks. All right, let's talk a little bit about off-ball linebackers before we get into the secondary. The secondary really important, obviously, for Vikings fans who we talked a little bit about guard, of course. That's going to be a need for the Vikings probably. A little bit about interior defensive tackles, maybe a need, I don't know. But certainly it seems like the Vikings will probably plumb the secondary market. So let's keep that last. Linebackers, is that a position where workouts matter to you? What workouts do matter? Do you have a size cut? Because linebackers have been getting super small. But I mean, we've talked about how all these positions have gotten smaller. Linebackers, I think, more than any other position, have gotten way, because they used to be 250 pounds, and you were undersized when you were 240. Now you got guys who might be 219, right? So this is a crazy change. Yeah,
the enormous middle linebacker from the past, it went the way of like the 7-footer in the NBA. Remember, I guess Zach Edey, that guy kind of disputes this, but there was for a while there, the NBA wasn't touching like the stud 7-foot plus guys in college basketball that didn't move very well, like the big tree kind of a guys. Whereas in the 80s and the 70s, those guys were like, the highest draft picks or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's, same thing here. You're getting smaller at linebacker. The only tests that we have found that have any correlation at all there, it's speed, which maybe goes into the same idea that we're talking about in modern football, but that both your 40 and then your speed score, combining it with the weight, that is all that we have found, or at least in the regression analysis that I've done at a couple different workplaces. Because I always thought with that one, like how is there not an agility one, right? Like how is there no aspect to that? But what we found is speed score and 40.
I'm taking a look at what I found. I found a little bit of size-adjusted agility, but the things that matter the most are just a little bit with the size-adjusted agility. But the things that matter the most are actually broad jump matters a lot in my testing, and then 20-yard split. So the 40-yard obviously is good if you have it. You can use that instead. But if you have the 20-yard split, that's even better. And then I also found that height actually does matter a little bit, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Huh. Not a ton, but it helps, right? You'll always have your Eric Kendrickses, right? But a little bit better to be a little bit taller.
You see over the line, you have a little bit more surface area, try to bat down balls, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think
sort of thing.
that's a lot. And height might be a proxy for arm length here. Like, because I don't
Yeah.
do, and I should probably rerun a lot of these things to include arm length or reincorporate wingspan into my data set, which doesn't even have wingspan in it right now. But like, it might just be that, when I'm measuring height, I'm really measuring arm length, which will matter for getting off of blocks and matter for obviously pass deflections like we just mentioned. But yeah, I think speed is the primary component here. I used to find, until I reran the data and found it was like probably 20 split that I wanted, was that if I gave a big bonus to guys who ran faster than a 4.6, it was really good for athleticism, like kind of regardless of size, but also just like if you ran a 4.59 or faster, that was really good for my data.
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about cornerbacks. Now, the thing about cornerbacks, everyone says, hey, the combine doesn't matter for most positions. Obviously, the two of us disagree, but the combine doesn't matter for most positions, but it definitely matters for cornerbacks, and it definitely matters at the 40-yard dash.
Yeah.
Feels like that one everyone just agrees on.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. For that position, you have to be a certain level of fast. It just is what it is. You're nullified if you're not. And of course that's at the top for me. You're 40 and then you're size adjusted 40. The other test that we've seen some correlation is vertical with the cornerbacks, but those are but predominantly speed, and then added into your weight a little. Like for instance, Hairston mentioned you're going to run the high 4.2s, but Hairston he's on the skinny side for a corner. He weighed in at 179 at the Senior Bowl, so you size adjust it so he can get properly dinged, against some of the cornerbacks that are high 190s or 200 pounds.
Yeah, when I ran the data, I found actually only 4 things mattered for me. One, this is actually a little bit surprising, although when you understand kind of what the cutoff is, I have a threshold for bench, which is you have to get at least 8 reps. My data suggested that if you can't even get 8 reps on the bench as a corner, that's going to hurt you. It's not a high threshold, but it is one of a couple of them have failed to meet. I think what's the percentage? 88% of corners get at least 8 reps on the bench. So it's not a super important until it is, right? So I found that. I found that length matters, 31.875 inch arms or longer. And then I do have a size adjusted agility score in there. It is a relatively small component. And then pure speed and weight. So the weight, so the height doesn't matter because the arm length kind of captures that a little bit, but also like there are 5'10" corners with 32-inch arms, and they tend to be better than 6-foot corners with 30-inch arms. That's just how it goes in my data.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weight matters, pure speed matters, and then you have to do a little bit with like the bench and the agilities so that you're not like stiff as a board out there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I was surprised that on the ones that we did that the agilities didn't pop more, but because that would stand to reason. But yeah, like I preferred your adding the fourth element on that one.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about. I might have to run this again because I think the last time I ran this, it was before. Yeah, so the last time I ran this, cover 3 was still really dominant in the NFL. Things are changing, so it might. Length might matter a little bit less. Agility might matter a little bit more in the modern NFL environment. But that one, I'm kind of curious. Who are some guys that, given that cornerback is going to be a position that the Vikings might target, aside from the Kentucky guy, who are some guys that might kind of meet some important thresholds here at cornerback that you're kind of interested in watching in Indianapolis?
I'm very curious to see what Jahdae Barron runs. He's the Texas corner. He was a nickel before. He was a boundary this year, but they play him everywhere. They play his zone system. And they would move him all over the place. Even this past year, they moved him to nickel. They moved him to deep safety. They put him in the box when they were in dime as a linebacker. They would do all this different stuff. And he was absolutely fabulous this year. But what does he test, right? Like we haven't seen him in man coverage really. Very, very limited snaps in man coverage. Is he Devin Witherspoon? Or is he one of the zone guys that just doesn't have the kind of foot speed that we need for his size, around 5'11", 190, something like that. very, very curious to see the way that he tests. He had coming into the year from the scouting services, he had a day 2 grade from one of them, round 4 from the other.
Interesting.
And he had a tremendous season. He was one of the top guys in run stops, one of the top guys in quarterback pressures. His coverage numbers were insane. 33.1 quarterback rating against on targets. He had 5 interceptions. Like, you look up and down, it's like, this is crazy good. Jeff Gladney's were too, right? Like, this is a system that seemed to feature and facilitate stuff for Barron, and I love how active he was. But again, didn't see him much in the man coverage. Need to see how fast he is. Big one for him. This isn't testing, but it's crucial. The medicals on Morrison and Ravel, and speaking specifically to the Vikings, you're sitting in the 24 slot, and assuming they can't get a tag and trade for Sam, which I know people are still holding out hope for it. To get that, it is going to require multiple organizations offering Sam over $40 million AAV multi-years, and you might need 3, right, in order to make it make sense for one of them to try to hop the line with, oh, hey, if you just tag them, I don't know. I mean, we might have 3 organizations dumb enough to do it. I don't think so. So anyway, I'm working under the assumption that the Vikings will just head in with the 4 picks that they have. At that point, you almost have to trade down. The medicals, so you can, flesh out your picks, get up to 6 or whatever. The medicals on Morrison and Ravel become really fascinating for a team like the Vikings, because I think something people don't understand out there is, you hear these prospects going to the combine, then it's like combine medicals. Everyone's heard that, and combine medical rechecks. I don't think what people understand is that it's all 32 medical staffs that are getting in there, and then they all have their separate opinions, right? It's not like there's not like one doctor, and then he sees everyone, and then he, at a summit with the teams, like announces one by one, oh, this guy, it's not serious at all, but this guy, it's super duper serious, right? It's like, so the whole point I'm trying to make is different organizations are going to view injuries for players very differently, right? 2 doctors are going to see things in a different way. Ravel, he's coming off the torn ACL that he had in practice in September. That one you ostensibly would not be as concerned about because of the modern medicine with the ACL, but we're going to have to see. And then does that drop him any? And then the guy we're really monitoring for drop watch, if he doesn't get good news at the medicals, it's Morrison from Notre Dame. Morrison was the best player on the field damn near every time he stepped on it when he was in college. His father is an NFL player. Morrison, as a freshman, he was on the all-freshman team. I think he might have he either won the Thorpe or he's like in the one of the finalists as a sophomore, and then he ends up getting knocked up for this season with a hip injury. And the hips, that's one thing where the NFL evaluators, they get really skittish, right? Because we're analytics guys, we're numbers guys, and over the ocean of data, if you look at hip injuries, it's one of the things that is going to cleave down the careers, the production over the ocean. Not for every guy. Right. There's guys that overcome it. There's other guys that are Bo Jackson. Right. And that's the beginning of the end with it. So the different medical stats have to parse that. And because you could see a scenario where he starts to fall through the wickets and the Vikings at 24, it could give you another bullet if you have a situational assumption of we think he's going to fall into the early second, even though this is a top without the hip injury. This is a top 15 pick all day. But he could fall through the wickets there. The teams maybe that needed the corners after, because he ain't going to go in the top 15 now, I would assume. The ones after that need a corner, maybe a couple of their medical staffs are like, you can't take them this high. So it would give you another bullet for the buckets of positions that you need. You're the Vikings. Interior defensive line, of course, is there. You probably need 2 new starters there this offseason, right? By the time we get to the draft. Hopefully you have taken care of one of those, but you probably still will have one on the need list. Cornerback is the same thing. Right now, if you re-sign Murphy, I still think you have to consider acquiring two starting caliber boundary guys. So that depends on your read of your own injured guy in Blackman, right? But again, if Morrison, where are you at on that? Are you comfortable trading down? Are you comfortable he could be in your bucket of next guys? If you do a trade down along with some interior defensive linemen, but keeping an eye on those guys testing, their medical checks will be very, very important. Those two guys.
Yeah. So for some additional, I did write about this a little bit in my last year's piece on is the combine dying is what I wrote. And in it, I talk about the medical element of it because no matter what happens to, data and stuff like that. And there is one question for the piece I want to ask you. I know we've been running a long, long time. Sorry for taking all your time, but thank you for being here. But one element of whether or not the combine is dying is this medical thing. My understanding is that, like you mentioned, it's all 32 team doctors in there. My understanding is that players will go through essentially 8 rounds of medical interviews with 4 teams in each round, right? And so to prevent like same division teams and stuff like that from being in the same. And so if you're a player like Morrison who has this hip injury that might require pretty significant a pretty significant look at the data. It's like if you need like an X-ray, it's one X-ray, but like 8 rounds of guys looking at it and asking the player questions. It's a fairly onerous process for players that have a medical question. But my question for you is, and again, we'll talk about the quarterbacks in a second. I do have another question about Barron that I wanted to ask you, but my question for you is, with the nature of the combine, we've seen participation, especially in the 3-cone. We talked about the importance of agility drills, drop off really dramatically. Not just because of like the COVID. We saw this actually in 2020, but then 2021 we didn't really have a normal combine. 22, 23, 24, we also had very few, especially running backs, but very few wide receivers and running backs perform the 3-cone and the short shuttle, in part because they're occurring at like 7, 8, 9 p.m. at night with the way they've moved things around. Does this like represent a consistent concern for you?
It does in the way, not for the prospects, but for the way the event is laid out. It was an unintended consequence of the NFL, how do you say, having their cake and wanting to eat it too. Because what they want, the NFL, they wanted to have the news cycle during the day with the podium sessions, and then they want everyone in front of their TV at night watching the test. Well, what does that do? The guys that are testing, your podium session is the day before, and then you're doing all your interviews and team interviews and such like this, and then the next day you're waiting around all day, and then your testing begins. And most of them will skip the bench, which hilariously enough they actually do in the banquet hall where the podium sessions are occurring. So
yes.
if anyone
it's like a little curtain, it's so ridiculous.
It is so ridiculous. Like for people out there that haven't been where all the stuff for the media is, it's in the Indianapolis Convention Center, which is basically on the other end of a 1 mile long road from Lucas Oil Stadium. And this road on both sides is dotted with like hotels and restaurants and whatnot. But the biggest ballroom in this convention center, that is what is used for the podium sessions. And as Arif said, they literally drop an enormous black curtain in the middle of it. And then the bench press is occurring on the other side of it as you're interviewing people at the podium sessions. So if anyone's out there and on TV, I don't know if one of the things they'll like, show some of the podium sessions. If you hear yelling and grunting and someone screaming, one more, that's what it is. It is the bench press is going on the other side of the curtain. But the rest of the tests, they obviously occur a mile down the road at Lucas Oil Stadium. And for that, like the NFL needs to figure out a way to make it easy for these kids to do all the tests. You don't want to give them any more excuse to drop out. I love when they do most of the tests there because you control it, right? Like the year when we had COVID and there was no combine testing and everyone was at their pro day and you just had to take that. I hated that. The data was all over the place, right? Like the pro days, you're running on different surfaces. You have different people that are testing it. Some of the schools appear to be fudging their numbers a little bit. And that was the whole data set that we had. So it wasn't, you couldn't compare people against each other in terms of that. So my suggestion would be, if you want to keep it in prime time like that, you want to keep doing it like that, I would have the testing for each position over 2 days. And I don't see what the problem is with this. They're already in town. They do the podium session the day before. Why not? Why don't you cut it in half? That night, you could do, say that position group that's doing their podium session. Let's say it's on Monday. Well, let's say Monday afternoon. Now you get to go behind the curtains, and anyone that wants to do their bench press, the 1 or 2 people from the position group that might actually want to do the bench press, they can, right? And then let's say, you can pick whether it's the 40, whether it is the agility ones, or whether it's the jumps. So let's say you get 2 that day, and then the other day it's your other 2, right? Like the reason that they're all skipping the 3 cone is because like if I was an agent, I would tell them to skip it too, because you've run your, this is after you've done your team interviews, you've done your media, all this sort of stuff. Then you have to wait around all day, and then you're in the gauntlet of the test, right? Where the last one is the 3 cone. Oh, you're going to be exhausted at that point. What, are you going to run your best 3 cone after you've, for the previous 3 hours you've been sitting around as the other guys run, and then you get your run, and then at the end of the night there, and it's late at night at that point too, I'd be like, screw this, I'll just do it at my pro day. So the NFL needs to do a better job. And I think the way you do that is spreading it over 2 days for the position groups, and you're not losing anything at night either, right? Like, cause you'd still have the same tests occurring over the same time frame, but you could get more people testing if you spread their tests over 2 days.
Dope. Love to hear it. I love the idea. And it is so frustrating for me too, as like a data completionist. All right. We're both on the same page there.
Yeah.
All right. So I did want to ask one question about Barron before we hit the safeties, which is the way that you described him sounded to me kind of like, and this is not a player comparison, this is an NFL role comparison. So just to be very clear.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me that you could play the role that for the first couple of years of his career that Antoine Winfield Jr. played, my bad, and Minkah Fitzpatrick played with the Steelers, where it was like a safety, played in the box a little bit, played in the nickel, but wouldn't really play outside corner and would kind of float around. Obviously, we're familiar here with the Vikings with Josh Metellus, who played a lot less in terms of nickel, a lot more in the box, but that kind of versatile role for a guy that if this guy doesn't test, with a 4.4 40 or something like that, he seems like a ball player, right? It seems like you want him on the field. Is that role going to be kind of appropriate for him?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a guy where it's the boundary corner version of that. And Metellus, that's exactly what I was thinking, but it's like he moves all over the place, but it's like now you got a boundary corner version of that. It's an interesting prospect because you don't often see the dude that is the clear lockdown, the boundary corner one, but then he's moving to all these other different roles. Now with Barron, the previous season was starting at the nickel, so he had experience with that. And he also, when he was the nickel, that's where he got the experience shifting. Okay, this play, we need you at deep safety. Okay, and the packages were when we're in dime, you're best in the box there as one of the, stuff like that. And it was like, it's like they couldn't help themselves his last season, and to still do that when he was the boundary corner. He's an interesting thought experiment. This year, his numbers jumped up overall we can just sort of ballpark it with one. The year before 2023, when he was the nickel, he, in terms of PFF wins above replacement or wins above average, the stat that they have for that, he was 0.13, which was still 85th percentile. He ranked 74th out of defensive backs in the FBS. The year before, he was 24th, 0.22. This year, he hopped up to 0.88. So what PFF is telling you is Jahdae Barron alone over an average FBS cornerback was worth nearly one win. He flipped a game for Texas over the aggregate and finished number one in the FBS among the defensive backs in wins above replace. And now it's a usage where will the NFL actually use him that way, right? Like Brian Flores is sick enough to do it. Brian Flores might be the only guy and be like, I'm going to use him exactly like Texas did that last year. we're gonna play him freaking everywhere. Other teams, I don't know if you're going to get that creative usage with him. I think the testing, this is where it gets really interesting with a guy like this. If Barron doesn't test as well, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. He might get shoved out of the first round, but he for sure will be pigeonholed as you're just a nickel. You're a nickel defender going forward. But where if he tests really well, all of a sudden, that is where you get the Devin Witherspoon stuff coming. This is Devin Witherspoon with the versatility that we do not typically associate with boundary cornerbacks. We associate it with move pieces like a Metellus.
So if he tests well, cornerback too, assuming Travis Hunter's a cornerback?
If I don't know that he can get above Will Johnson, but he's absolutely going to shoot by the others. And the way that I put Will Johnson at that point, he might not be as comfortable as he is right now. Will Johnson missed half the season this past year. And whenever he was out there, he was locked down. But he doesn't need Jahdae Barron going out there and posting a 96 percentile RAS coming off the season he just had. Because, that's where it's going to get really – I think that's where it could become a debate for sure.
Fair enough. All right. I mean, I've kept you so long, man. Safeties, man. What matters to you?
To me, this is another speed one. Let's see. In fact, the only thing I got on there is speed score for the safeties.
Really?
As far as something where now, just my head, I would add certainly vertical and probably broad to that as well. The triggering downhill thing is something that I enjoy in my safeties, but with what we ran, that by far the most statistically significant thing over the data set, it was the size adjusted speed for that position.
It's interesting to me. So speed is just like not that important in my data. That's so cool. It's obviously it plays some level of importance. That's just how the game works. But I found that, first of all, you have to have a minimum level of performance in the broad jump, in the 20-yard dash, and in size-adjusted short shuttle. So the 20-yard split, you need to run faster than a 2.7, which is not particularly difficult. About 70% of safeties have done that. And then with the broad jump, what was it? You need more than 110 inches, which again, not super difficult. Most safeties will do that too. But let me take a quick look actually at the averages here. For whatever reason, I'm not getting the averages. Doesn't matter. But you just need a minimum on like the short shuttle for size adjusted short shuttle, like just a little bit better than the NFL average for your weight. And then I found that just like your size matters a lot, and not like your height, but like specifically your weight and then a little bit your density. And then if you can do that and then also run a fast enough 20-yard split, you're probably in a pretty good spot, is what I found. Yeah,
it's the position itself. There was a college football safety coach, actually, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. He asked me, he goes, scouting high school safeties. That's him. That's him right there. No, just kidding. But he was saying, is there anything that you would look at high schoolers? Basically, what he was asking me to try to find sleeper safeties. What would be, the trait that you would look for the most? And I said safety is probably the damn hardest one, because the differentiator there, it is how quickly you parse information. Right. I mean, like Kyle Hamilton, the reason he fell a little bit from where he should have.
Are you an S2 guy?
A little bit. Those things interest me. That now they have this what do you call it? Psychological test. They have those ones. For me though, I don't think there's a shortcut with the safeties. You need the all 22. And you need to see how quickly they're parsing information, number one, and then how quickly they react to it. And then the third one is, when they get on the doorstep, whatever that may be, at the end of running the alley, because they denoted the run play, they trigger downhill quick. When they're on the doorstep, what's their tackle rate? Did they finish there? When do they trigger down fast enough, in like a lurking zone kind of a thing where they can challenge the catch points? so how effective are they at the moment of truth? And then essentially how quickly do they get there? Unfortunately, this is one of the things where our modern testing, where it sort of falls short, right? Like the speed matters to me, right? And the body composition, it matters to me. But like what the most matters to me with safeties is how quick, it's just like you slow it down when you're watching them frame by frame. And it's like, at what point should the average human being have made a decision of like, okay, this is probably what this play is, and start to act, right? And then when, when it's on the table for them, then have they immediately triggered down? Are they acting on that right away? It's like that sort of stuff. And I just don't think like where we've gotten with, even with like film analysis, I wish that there was a way that we could get a metric on that of how quickly are you parsing it, and then how quickly are you making your decision. But yeah, it's just one of the grind the film things where you just had to, with that position with the all-22.
Fair enough. Also an area where the Vikings may be looking at the position, depending on how free agency goes. Any quick thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, it will be interesting, right? Because if Harry the Hitman retires and then if Bynum leaves, we're going to have to replace the team's dance coordinator as well if Bynum does. But hopefully we're able to do that. I really enjoyed those. But in that case, yeah, you'd be looking for safeties, and if everybody tosses out, well, if that happened, then they'll sign Javon Holland. It's like, maybe, right. We can't just assume that. But,
free agency is trying to sign Javon Holland. So you're good. Don't worry about it. Well,
that's exactly right. It's like I've already earmarked that money for Trey Smith and Milton Williams and DJ Reed. So it's like I got big eyes at the buffet. Let's just say that with all the cap space they have. But I think the interesting one for safety, if you're let's say that happened, and let's say you're boxed out at some of the signing an Insta starter at safety because your money's gone elsewhere. I think Malachi Starks from Georgia he would be the tailor-made safety fit for Flores. It was very similar thing of that, the more traditional move safety guy, right? That we're talking about. You can put him in nickel, you can put him deep, he can play in the box, and he's going to make plays everywhere. It's like it's sort of like a Brian Branch. That sort of a thing, moving him around. He's going to be effective anywhere. And then the other kid that I'm interested to see how he tests is the South Carolina dude that I do not pronounce his name very well, the last name.
Amenwari?
Yeah.
I don't know if I got it. Is that who you're talking about? Okay.
That is absolutely Nick E, I will call him. Yeah. But I really, really like his game. He is very, very active. A lot of run stops on him. He defends, gets his hands on a lot of balls, and you can play in multiple different places too. He's more your like the hybrid between safety linebacker as opposed to safety corner. But that's a guy you can put in the box, and he will act as a linebacker for you. He'll go sideline to sideline. He'll knock some heads. So he might not be as quite as clean of a fit for Flores. Malachi Starks, it just makes sense on the surface. After that, you're dropping off a bit where I don't know if there's any other safety in this class where I would be like super comfortable of like, he's starting day one for Brian Flores. Like, you have so many responsibilities in that system, and Flores is shifting you all over the place, and you're going to pretend on this play to do this. You're going to mime it. You're going to sim it. But then you're actually going to be covering this zone on the other side of the field in the third sector during the play. It's like all this different stuff. Starks, I trust you to do that. The other guys, I'm not so sure. So I think if I'm the Vikings, I want to make sure I have my starting safeties probably before the draft.
Fair. I mean, I can't imagine the fans would be too upset if they drafted another safety from Georgia. I'm sure they're fine with that.
Oh boy, there would be some bitching. Oh, people would not be happy. People would not be happy. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's actually a really good point, because I think the fans would be irate.
Yeah, now I kind of want it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, let's do this.
All right, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. I didn't give you a time, but I think I kind of suggested it might have been something like 45 minutes. It was an hour and a half. Thank you for coming on, man. We got to hang out, and when the Prize Pick stuff drops, text me so that I can lose some money with you.
1,000%. Always a pleasure, my friend. Appreciate you.
Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at DorKU, and you can find my NFL draft stuff at Fantasy Life. We just finished. I ranked on my top 18 quarterbacks. I did like full scouting reports for 5 of them, and then scouting notes on the top 12. But we did get out to 18. Our boy Max Brosmer, I put you QB 12. You're it's right around where I had Sean Clifford. So it's
Shrine practice superstar Max Brosmer.
There you go. Yeah. So he could get drafted, but yeah, you can check all that out. I have the comps on everybody as well. I think Max Brosmer, I had to Sugar Shane Bouchel from back in the day at SMU.
That's not wonderful. Okay.
I'm sorry, Max, if you're listening, if you don't like that one, but I do have you as quasi draftable, or at least one of the top UDFA QBs. So
perfect.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, brother.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Eldon Mosshart, who asks, how much money per year is Bynum worth for vibes alone?
On just vibes, I think that's more than vet minimum, which is at this point around $1 million a year. I would say probably just from a vibes perspective, $1.5 million, $2 million. Then you throw in the fact that he's a pretty good safety. And, I had projected him at 14 million. Vibes is a good point. So maybe we could see 15.5 million a year for him just because of how wonderful a glue guy he is.
It's an important role, and he does it really well.
He does it really well.
At Trade Kirk asks, can you guys realistically see a trade between Herbert and JJ McCarthy happening a year from now? Not even a trade, like obviously picks and like player trading, but other players would be attached. Just curious because there's been a lot of rumblings about the offense tying down Herbert, and not much is being asked.
No, I don't see that. So obviously the connection between JJ McCarthy and Jim Harbaugh is there, and so you'd think, hey, maybe. But like Justin Herbert is like a uniquely talented quarterback. I think that he is, at the moment, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the NFL. What I think kind of doesn't matter for the purposes of this question, but I do think that the Chargers kind of agree with that. I think that even with a new regime that didn't pick this quarterback, I think that they love him. And also he played a lot more efficiently this year, and I think in part because of the changes in the offense that were made with the new coaching staff. And I don't see the Vikings giving up JJ. And again, if Justin Herbert's that good, hey, maybe that trade would be a good idea. But if the Vikings are going to take advantage of, a rookie quarterback contract situation, there's no way to, go about doing that and then trading, for Justin Herbert. I think it's just, there's kind of entrenchment in the way the rosters are built right now from both sides. And also, I don't think either side is that interested in it. I think that the Vikings have invested a lot in JJ McCarthy. I don't just mean from like a pick perspective, but also from spent a lot of time on this guy. Obviously, not as much as you might want because of the injury, but spent a lot of time on this guy. I think they want to see it through. So I don't see that happening. Obviously, next year that could change. I don't know. Everything is up in the air, right? But no, I don't think that that's going to be likely, especially from the Chargers side.
Let's go to Damar, who asks, am I crazy for trying to piece together a narrative that Alex Smith to Pat Mahomes is similar to Sam Darnold to JJ McCarthy? Are there any similarities besides both starting while the rookie mostly sits, or is this just cope?
It is cope, and it is a little crazy, but I don't know. That's like the fun part about being a fan, is you can just do that, right? Who's stopping you? I think Alex Smith and Sam Darnold are very different in a lot of ways. Also, first of all, Alex Smith had revived his career with the 49ers before he was traded to Kansas City, because he traded for like a second-round pick. He's not going to do that if he only had the bust label. Right. Sam Darnold obviously was signed in free agency and needed to revive his career in a way that I think that though he played reasonably well in Carolina in his final 6 games there, is not the same thing as Alex Smith putting together a good season under Jim Harbaugh. So I think that that's a little bit different because everyone at that point had kind of understood Alex Smith to be a pretty good, if very safe quarterback, where I don't think Darnold was there. So I think that as a mentor, Alex Smith probably makes a little more intuitive sense. I don't think there's a ton of similarities there. I think physically they're a bit different. I think Sam Darnold's a better athlete. Alex Smith actually is actually a pretty good athlete, or was actually a pretty good athlete, and had a pretty good arm, and just never used either of those things. So I don't want to like mistake his play style for his traits, but Darnold is much more likely to use them, move around in the pocket, fire off some big throws and stuff like that. I don't know. They seem pretty different in a lot of ways, but hey, have fun with it, man. I don't know. Like Aaron Rodgers sat. That seems fun, to talk about quarterbacks who sit and now they're good. So yeah, it's the offseason. Who cares?
Did Jordan Love sit?
Yeah, he was the third stringer for a little bit.
Maybe that's the problem. If he would have been a second stringer for a while. I was just trying to goat you
using him in this example.
Yeah, I was just trying exactly. I was just trying to goat you into to talking about how bad Jordan Love is again. Sorry. That's my bad.
No, I get it.
JJ McDarnold asks.
Great name.
Wow. Defensive tackle, nose tackle in the draft. Are there any production metrics, PR, WR, RSR, sacks, QB hits, tackles for loss, etc., that are better at predicting NFL success than others?
For nose tackles, generally speaking, you're not going to get a lot statistically. I haven't looked at run stop rate for nose tackles because it is a relatively new statistic that I don't think we've got a lot of data for. Like, it got introduced with the ESPN stuff. PFF has had it for a long time, and they introduced it actually a little bit before the ESPN stuff in some version or another, like, positive run grade rate or whatever in their draft guides, but it wasn't accessible in their premium stats package. Now I believe it might be. The premium stats that you get on the NCAA side and the NFL side are slightly different. So I'm going to have to double check that. And maybe that's worth testing because now we have at least a little bit of data to look at that. But pressure rate for nose tackles didn't matter. Pass rush win rate, same thing. I don't have a good look at the data. Sacks for nose tackles didn't matter. Quarterback hits, tackles for loss, none of that, from what I could tell, for nose tackles mattered all that much. Now, if you listen to the interview with Thor, we did talk a little bit about athletic metrics, but this is a question about production metrics. And so I think that, snap count can actually help you a little bit, because I think if you're a premier nose tackle in the NFL, that's going to be a 2-down guy that's going to, be on the field for 400 snaps a year or something like that, 400 to 600 to maybe even 800. In college, you should probably be an 800 snap guy or something like that, or whatever the equivalent during a college season is, because they have fewer games. But you should be a pretty high snap. So if you're a low snap nose tackle who's only a 2-down guy, you're probably not going to make it in the NFL. So as a soft signal, maybe snap count. But yeah, I think for nose tackles, it's hard. For defensive tackles, I have found that pressure rate is pretty good, but you do need to leverage it against the environment that they're in. So what I did a little bit ago, and this was quite a bit ago, and it took a lot of time to really manage. But if you figure out kind of the general pressure rate that team has, or even more ideally, and this is what took so much time, the pressure rate that the opponent generally gives up, and adjust for that and create a pressure rate above expected, that's actually pretty decent for defensive tackles. And the reason that that's important in college and a lot less important in the NFL, although probably you should be doing that in the NFL if you really want to do kind of like a purely statistical analysis of a player, is because the systems in college are so different. In the NFL, you have largely uniform systems. There are quarterbacks who get rid of the ball, much quicker. But the systems are so drastically different in college. You've got some people that are doing a little bit under center, people that run the ball a lot, people that are really play action dependent, people that are running, getting rid of the ball like Bo Nix style, like immediately, people who run around a lot and that works for them, like Caleb Williams. So you have to kind of adjust for that for each opponent that they're up against. I imagine that pass rush win rate allows us to kind of shortcut that a little bit. So I would imagine for, defensive tackles that primarily rush the passer, people who line up in the B gap. So that's between the guard and the tackle. I imagine that helps. I did find that sacks were helpful. But not extraordinarily helpful, just a little bit helpful. And in the same way that I found sacks really helpful at edge, you just have to look at sacks from even if it's just total sacks. Sack rate is better, but total sacks from the edge, whatever their best season is, it doesn't have to be the most recent season, generally does a better job predicting than a lot of other metrics that people use, and you'd be surprised at how effective sacks can be. Tackles for loss, also same thing. I haven't looked at tackles for loss for 3 techniques. I imagine that's really helpful in the same way that, Thorne mentioned in the interview, Danielle Hunter didn't have too many sacks. What he did have was a lot of tackles for loss. And I imagine for defensive tackles, if you don't have a ton of sacks, but you have a lot of tackles for loss, that's probably pretty helpful. But I haven't investigated this as thoroughly as I've investigated this for like wide receivers or edge rushers or cornerbacks.
Let's go to the handsome Ben Greenhagen, who asks,
and to clarify, you add in the handsome in the mailbag, right?
Yes, but
I'm the one who called him that.
You're the one who labeled him that, so I feel like that's something that should carry.
Yeah, I just don't want people thinking Ben, very handsome Ben, is arrogant on top of that.
No, incredibly humble is what our interactions have shown. The handsome and incredibly humble Ben Greenhagen. Hypothetically, if the Vikings were forced to franchise tag a player, who would you pick and why?
Man, that one's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, like Sam Darnold, if you could turn that into a trade, I don't know how likely that is or how possible that is. But other than that, I don't know that there's like a ton of players that are worth franchising. Like, I don't know that Byron Murphy is good enough, right, to be a franchise tag candidate. And after that, like that's probably it. Like running back salaries have gone up a little bit again after what we've seen from like, Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, where like in the second contract, these running backs are actually doing some stuff. So I don't know if you'd want to do that for Aaron Jones. And I just don't see like another guy that's worth that franchise. So like Byron Murphy would be the only other one. And he's playing all right, but I don't know that he's playing at a franchise tag level, which again, because it's only the 1 year, you only have to pay him at that rate for the 1 year. It's not that big a deal. But I'd just rather come to a long-term agreement with Byron Murphy. Sam Darnold is the only one where like if you were required to franchise tag someone, he'd be the guy and probably to secure a trade.
Yeah. Sweet Skull asks, if you could only sign NFL free agents from our NFC North neighbors, which combo of 3 free agents would you choose? One from Green Bay, one from Chicago, and one from Detroit to best fit our team needs.
So I was hoping to get, cornerback, defensive tackle, guard. Like you just knock all of those out. And I couldn't find a defensive tackle that I liked enough, especially because all the defensive tackles from this group that we're looking at are kind of just all from the Detroit Lions. And again, they're all essentially nose tackles. Like they're not people that I think would be helpful. And you're sacrificing like getting a good cornerback, which is nice. I would like to get a good cornerback. I think most of us would like that. So I went with 2 cornerbacks and 1 guard. And none of these players are like outstanding. They're not the top of the market players. And I think everyone just probably saw that coming into this exercise. But I grabbed Carlton Davis, who is coming off of an injury, but he's probably going to be a little bit undervalued. His PFF grades are good and solid. I think that if you take a look at how he played in Tampa Bay, that actually it's better than his grades had kind of determined. They were kind of like a pretty fun cornerback duo, Davis and Jamel Dean. And I think that Davis actually played really, really well for them. So he's 28. He's about to enter his age 29 season, or it's going to finish the year next year at age 29. It's a little bit older, but that's fine. And then with the Bears, when I was looking at the Bears, I couldn't find anyone that was like an outstanding value that was kind of interesting to go after. You could get a 42-year-old Mercedes Lewis. That'd be kind of funny. But yeah, I was thinking like maybe there's like somebody coming off of a rookie deal that'd be kind of fun to add. You've got a super athlete like Daniel Hardy who's like potentially, but like I don't know, I just want to make the team better. I don't want like a flyer. So I went after Tevin Jenkins, who has played all right at guard. He's not been a very good tackle. He has played, I would argue, maybe a little bit above average at guard. He's played both right tackle and left guard, and so wherever kind of works, I think you probably have him at right guard. But wherever kind of works for him, I think is fine. And then Green Bay, they basically have no one hitting free agency. So this one was like, I don't want AJ Dillon. I don't know if like Josh Myers might be interesting. He's all right, but. And, if you picked Josh Myers, I wouldn't be upset with you. Like getting a center's fine. But I went with another corner. I went with Eric Stokes. Because it'd be really funny if the guy I kept insulting ended up on the Vikings. It feels like that happens a decent amount. But B, he's another injury value guy that sounds exactly like the kind of guy that Kwesi would sign. And you're not going to be committed to too much with him. You sign him, and if he doesn't crack the starting group, that's fine. You're not putting yourself out by signing him for a $4 or $5 million deal. He's probably going to go for more than that, but he's 26, so he's the youngest. He's got the most upside. Also, would be funny to sign Eric Wilson from the Packers. Bring him back.
Let's go to Beef Brewski, who asks, could Pat Reichard be the answer at running back? I don't like the idea of bringing in another fullback for any reason, but
yeah, he's also 300 pounds. I understand, James, that your concern is this impending threat to CJ Ham,
Captain Ham.
But I, in the spirit of the exercise, let's assume that Pat Ricard is a halfback and not a fullback, and that CJ Ham will for some reason be blocking for him. Nope, he's not the answer.
Serious thought happened there. Serious thought was had. Situations, scenarios were put forth. The answer, no. Dusty had a question. He asks, who retires first, Andy Reid or Travis Kelce?
Probably Travis Kelce. The great thing about being a coach is you can just keep doing that for a long time, but being a player, it hurts after a while.
Being a coach eventually hurts after a while too, but the winning helps. The
winning helps. Yeah. No, I think Andy wants to maybe not set a record, but be the best coach of all time, right? I think he wants to put his hat in the ring for that. And so I think he's going to be around for a little bit. I think Kelce, I think he's made a lot of money, not just on the field, but the deal with for New Heights is $100 million for 3 years. He's probably good. He's got a fun home life to go to. So I think he just wants to be done.
Andy Reid right now is he's at 273 wins in the regular season to Bill Belichick's 302. If he was realistically wanting to take that, it would take another couple seasons, but it is possible. He's already higher up than Tom Landry, Curly Rambo, Marty Schottenheimer, Chuck Noll, Dan Reeves, Knox, and Tomlin. Oh, and Mike McCarthy somehow has 174.
What I really like as a metric for coaches is total games above 500, right? So you take the total number of games they've played, cut it in half. That's where they are at 500. How many wins do they have that are above that number? Because it rewards both success and longevity. Because I think win-loss record, you get guys who've coached for 6 years, 4 years, 5 years, and who just happen to be on good teams. And then total wins, there's a lot in terms of total successes that kind of pile up. The thing about coaches is they do get fired, and so it's not that important to kind of parse it out like that. But Mike Tomlin looks really good in this metric, whereas in total wins he kind of drops out of the top 10. But Andy Reid is 10 wins or 10 games above 500 away from Bill Belichick. You could do this in 2 seasons, maybe even 1. I think that would rule. And then is a lot to catch up to Don Shula and George Halas. We'll ignore that for now.
Yeah, those are the ones that that number is retired up in the ceiling for a reason.
Yeah.
let's go to Chandler, who asks, for the pandering to the locals corner, i.e. Chandler, what Gopher or Minnesotan is most likely to make the Vikings roster next fall? They pick Tyler Cooper or Daniel Jackson late in the draft. Free agent Tyler Johnson becomes wide receiver 4. Bobby Bell finally signs the lowball contract the Vikings offered him in 1963. I love that.
Hey, man, if he had accepted that, the Vikings might have won Super Bowl 4. All right? It's on the table. Please, Bobby Bell. Also, by the way, he like returned to the University of Minnesota like 30 years later and got his degree. Great story. Okay, so I looked at the free agents that are from Minnesota that could like reasonably like make the 53-person roster. And there's only like 3 players that I think could conceivably do it. And 2 of them I'm not even confident that they would. So the one that I'm pretty confident would make the roster is Benjamin St-Juste. Cornerback for the Washington Commanders, was a 3rd-round pick. It seems like Commanders fans don't like him, and fair enough. He's had like half of a good season, and then the rest has been kind of like whenever there's a big play, he seems to be near it, which I know I'm not super selling this guy to you, but I think he's actually pretty decent. I don't want him covering the top receiver or anything like that, but I think you could do a lot worse at cornerback 3 and certainly a lot worse at cornerback 4. So he could end up being on the team and making the roster. Carter Coughlin was a 7th-round pick for the Giants. I had to double check to see if he was still in the NFL. He is. That rules. He just finished his 2024 season with the Giants. Moved up and down the practice squad, so not like super, in the NFL, but he's done some special team stuff. He was somebody that I thought the Gophers used him in the way that best helped the Gophers, but did not best help him. Moving him from linebacker to edge rusher was great for the Gophers and not great for his professional prospects. But that kind of versatility, I think Brian Flores would know how to use. Tyler Johnson, he's been kind of a meme in draft Twitter for a while, and especially for Vikings fans. Pretty good wide receiver for the Gophers. Didn't make a huge impact with the Buccaneers. And then when Chris Godwin and then occasionally Mike Evans inevitably got hurt, and you saw like elevations for players, it was like, Scotty Phillips? No, Scott Walker is the governor or former governor of Wisconsin. But yeah, it's like Scotty Phillips or whatever. Like it wasn't Tyler Johnson. So it seems like he's kind of made some waves as a special teamer, but those are like the guys that could potentially make it. In the draft, it looks like the Vikings could, if they trade down in the 1st round, get some 2nd-round capital, go after Arante Ursary, tackle at Minnesota, potentially guard prospect. That's a possibility. I think it's unlikely because I think he's more likely to be a tackle. But you get into the 4th round, you might see someone like a Jaw Joyner, who I think, if I haven't done any consensus board work stuff yet, but I think if I did consensus board stuff, he'd be ranked right now below the 4th round. And I think that, and this is just me being a biased Gophers guy, I think he'll jump up in that estimation, especially after the combine, because he's a very explosive player. Then you've got Cody Lindenberg at linebacker. He's a potential 6th-round guy. You mentioned Dan Jackson, wide receiver, some pretty amazing catches, potentially 7th-round guy. Danny Strigo is probably undrafted. I wrote down 7th round just because he seemed to like make a huge impression at the Senior Bowl. He was a Hula Bowl guy, and typically Hula Bowl guys don't like get drafted. And well, first of all, they typically don't get drafted, but if they do, it's like 5th, 6th, 7th round. But he was a late call up to the Senior Bowl and apparently impressed a lot of people in a very short period of time. That might help him out. Otherwise, you could get like an undrafted free agent like Max Brosmer. I don't see him making the roster. Justin Wally, I could see him making the roster. Then you mentioned Tyler Cooper, who could be an undrafted free agent or 6th, 7th round guy. As an undrafted free agent, maybe not. But if they draft him in the 6th, 7th round, I could totally see him kind of hanging around. Because I think the Vikings need to clean house in terms of their offensive line depth, and that'll create opportunities for undrafted or late round guys. I was also trying to be like tricky and find guys who were previously at Minnesota and then went to other colleges. Like, what was his name? Austin Booker was a Minnesota guy. Beanie Bishop was a Minnesota guy. But like, they're not hitting free agency, so like, I couldn't. All of these people were drafted out of the University of Minnesota. Would have been fun to be tricky, but no opportunities there.
Let's go to our next question, which is, I believe, also from Chandler, who asks if Arif ate anything notable in Denton during the Shrine Bowl activities, and where did he go?
Yeah, I posted a picture of my barbecue. It was at Hutchins Barbecue, which I believe is not in Denton, but it's in that area. It's in the DFW area. It might be, I don't know, but it was outstanding. I've had a lot of barbecue in the South. It's great. I highly recommend getting barbecue in the South. And this is like upper tier stuff that I had there. It was really, really incredible. What they do is you like walk up and they've got essentially this assembly line of people that are preparing various different types of food. So like, brisket or pulled pork, or they've got like sausages and stuff like that. And you kind of tell them like, hey, I want a half pound of brisket. I want like 2 ribs. I want half a sausage or whatever. And they do all that and then they weigh it and you pay for how much it gets weighed. And then the sides, you can get like these little, the cardboard boats for sides. And if you can fit all the sides you want into one boat, you pay for one side. It's really cool. Basically the sides are buffet style. You just pull them into your little side thing. Anyway, that all happens. And then the dessert is free. Yeah. And it's so good. The cobbler's incredible. The banana pudding is, I'm crying a little bit. It's outstanding. It's so good.
I'm getting emotional just thinking about it.
Yeah. Look, I've had a lot of barbecue and that was up there, man. I went to multiple places in Mobile when I was visiting a friend in Birmingham. I went to multiple places in Birmingham. I've been to Austin. I've been to Dallas. I've been to a lot of. I've had barbecue in North Carolina, and everyone knows about Oklahoma Joe's in Kansas City. I've been to a lot of barbecue places in the South, and this was memorable. I highly recommend it.
Next question is going to be from Room Don Sharif, who asks, is Jim Marshall a Hall of Famer? If not, why? Same with Chuck Foreman.
Were I to make decisions on who gets into the Hall of Fame, both of them would be in the Hall of Fame for me. But I don't think either of them are making the Hall of Fame. I think for Jim Marshall, he has 2 Pro Bowls to his name. And he is the example of why, he's 2 Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro. He's the example of why yearly awards are just not that great, because over a multiple 3-year spans of his career, he would be considered a top 4 player at his position in the league, right? Which is the Pro Bowl, right? It's a top 4 player at your position. But because we don't decide these on 3-year cycles or 4-year cycles or 5-year cycles, over that span of time, given his level of play, he didn't spike up to 15, 16 sacks in a season. He consistently had 10, 11, maybe 12, right? And so not having those seasons individually in there hurts his Pro Bowl recognition, but he played better over a 3, 4, 5-year span, over multiple 3-year spans, than many of the people with more Pro Bowls than him. And so he doesn't get to go in because of the way we count these things, these accolades. So I would put him in. But especially when you're talking about, these, unless it's a weird situation, like a Floyd Little, someone did a whole letter writing, I think that's never going to happen again. But unless you have an unusual situation for these seniors, the senior committee guys, I think you kind of need the superficial numbers. For Chuck Foreman, I think his career just kind of wasn't long enough. I think his contributions to innovating what we call the West Coast offense, which if you trace the history of the West Coast offense from an implementation standpoint, it started in Cincinnati, really, under Paul Brown, where Bill Walsh was, and then became the West Coast offense after he went to Stanford and the 49ers. But the Vikings were doing all of that, and Chuck Foreman was a really critical element of that. Plus, he was a starter for 6 seasons, made the Pro Bowl in 5 of them, made first team All Pro in 1 of them, second team All Pro in 2 of them, won Rookie of the Year, won MVP votes in I think 3 of those years, if not 2 of those years. He was really outstanding. And he was like one of the first kind of multi-capable, like he was also receiving back. I would put him in, right? But I don't think he's going to get in because his career was like too short.
Next question is also from Room Don Sharif, who asks, NFL.com has us taking running back at 24 and 3 going in the first round. Is that Arif's worst nightmare?
Well, it's not my worst nightmare if 3 running backs go in the first round. Obviously that's not what you're talking about, but it felt like that was worded as part of the question. Wanted to address that. It does seem like that's possible. This is a really unusual running back class in that it is really good. It's like phenomenal at the top. It's really fantastic in the middle. It's great even at the bottom. There are going to be running backs that are going to go undrafted that in other years might have even been like 4th round guys. Like this is one of the best running back classes top to bottom that we've seen in a long, long time, at least from a prospect perspective. We don't know how they'll end up turning out. Were Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon in the same class as Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey? I want to say they were. So this is supposed to be a better class than that one. There's a quote given, I think, to Jeremy Fowler over at ESPN. If not, I'll put it in the show notes, whoever it is that said that. But there's a quote that this is like 2 good running back classes smushed together, which I think tells you a lot. So I wouldn't go with the running back in the first round. So I typically wouldn't anyway. Like I didn't think the Bijan Robinson pick was good. I think the Lions got, I'm not going to say lucky with the Jahmyr Gibbs pick, but I think it happened to work out for them when typically it doesn't. And from a process perspective, it wasn't a great move. Obviously we know about the Leonard Fournette pick. The Christian McCaffrey pick didn't give the Panthers a ton. And the Saquon Barkley stuff, like they didn't even re-sign him, right? Like he was their only good player for a while, and it was nice to have a good player, but a good player that didn't move the needle for you is not like very good, right? So I'm a little bit hesitant about that. I think the recent success of second contract guys like McCaffrey and Henry and Saquon Barkley and stuff like that, I think is going to push us to believe, especially because like the Eagles just won the Super Bowl with Barkley, we could believe that this is generally a good approach, and I still don't think it is. Also, like I guess I just don't see first rounder with NFL.com's mock draft was done by Daniel Jeremiah, who I love. I guess I just don't see it with Travion Henderson, who's the guy that they picked, as a first rounder. I think he's a very, very good back. But he just doesn't strike me as like a first round guy. I haven't broken him down in a lot of detail, so I could be super wrong about that. But in a defensive tackle class that's this good at the top, when you need this much along the interior offensive line, when you're missing this many cornerbacks, I just don't see a reason to go with that. So I think that that's one of the worst things the Vikings could do. And it also seems like kind of not something that they would typically do. I mean, the Vikings felt like they had undervalued running back, which is why they went after Aaron Jones. But like, they went after Aaron Jones. They didn't go after Saquon Barkley. Right? Like I still think that even though they're going to value running back more than they have in the past, they're still not going to value it at the top of the league. So this is probably not going to happen.
I feel like your worst nightmare in this particular instance would be that all of these running backs get paid.
Yeah, yeah, you've correctly identified my my rooting interest here, which is my takes.
Yes.
If all of these running backs get paid, it's bad for my takes.
Yep, that's all we're really caring about here. B Percenter asks, if the NFL had a similar cap situation to Major League Baseball, as in there isn't one, who would be the first player to get $100 million a year?
Patrick. I can't. It's Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to come away from the Super Bowl thinking that Mahomes is not like the best quarterback generally in the NFL. It's Patrick. I think what would happen is if that happens, he's immediately holding out. I think a lot of people are, because why wouldn't you? But if not him, I don't know who's going to be like in free agency in 2026. Looks like Danielle Hunter's hitting free agency, so maybe him. There's not a ton of quarterbacks that are hitting free agency in 26. Taking a look at edge rusher, yeah, maybe I don't know. Like these values will explode in that world. TJ Watt's gonna. I mean, he's 32, but I could see him for a 2-year deal for $100 million a year. It's obviously the quarterback is going to get paid the most, but I don't think that means that some of these players wouldn't get paid at these other important positions. But yeah, I don't know. Free agency class in 2026 doesn't look that great either. 27 has Baker Mayfield, so it'd be him if everybody has to stick under the current contract. And then maybe Tyreek Hill, maybe Devontae Adams. I know these are older players, so probably not. But yeah, I don't know. Myles Garrett's going to hit in 27, and though he's 32, I think he'd get a big contract. But yeah, I think we'd see holdouts, and then you'd see like Lamar and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes immediately get paid $100 million.
Yeah. Mal is asking, what are our 40-yard dash run records? As the only person who's done a timed one, Arif, I think you're the only one who's got that information for us.
Well, it's...
What did the sign say? Was it a 4.4?
No, the sign... Look, every time I tell this story, I tell people I don't believe what the sign said. It said a 4.57, which is faster than most NFL players. Like period. Like you cut the median, it's faster than that. I don't think, like, I might be able to outrun the slowest NFL player, but I'm probably in the 0th to 1st percentile. Like, there might be 1 or 2 players I outrun. Like, and you got to, like, the scenario might have to be, remember when Chris Jones fell down during the 40-yard dash? Like, it might have to be.
You and Rich Eisen, like, that would be a race.
Yeah. No, but like I think can't believe we kept tying. That's the most annoying thing. But yeah, no, my timed 40-yard dash is 4.57.
I really need to, if in case you are not familiar with this story, there are I believe it was 2 years ago. It might have been, how many years ago was that? Was that 3 years ago?
Could have been 3.
I want to say
at least 2.
I want to say 3 years ago. The combine, the I love that story so much. There was a story where Arif was running at the combine and then raced a kid.
Me and Mark okay, so we had just gone to Fogo de Chao. So first of all,
write that down.
Jot that down. And we were coming back, and like from Fogo to our hotel, like my hotel was right next to his, was the NFL Combine experience or whatever they call it. And they had like a 40-yard dash set up. And so like there was no more line left because technically the Combine experience was over, but everything was like still up. They hadn't taken anything down yet. And like the things were still working ostensibly. And Mark and I were, jabbing at each other, right? And Mark was like, yeah, I could toast you in this. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? Of course you couldn't. Mark is a little bit older than me, and I tend to get in my own head. I don't know. That must be a surprise to you, James. But I can get a little full of myself in the moment.
I can't imagine a scenario where that would happen, but please go on.
I mean, we were food drunk, right? We had a ton of food at Fogo de Chao. So I was like, no way. And so we agree that we're going to race. We go up to there. And Mark casually mentions he like did track in college. And I was like, oh, I'm done. Okay, great.
Nope.
And yeah. And so like we set up, we figure out like how we're going to do the starting, whatever. We set up and we run and we just tie. And it's like the most frustrating thing ever. Cause I'm like, as soon as we go, I'm locked in. I'm like, I can't lose. I'm super competitive, right? And there's no resolution. So like, I'm just super out of breath. He is frustratingly a little bit less out of breath. And he's like, let's do that again. And I can't back down. So I'm like, yeah, let's do it again. So we do it again, tie again, which is just crazy. Like, I'm sure like a timing mechanism that was accurate would, but we look up after our second run and it says 4.57 for both of us. And like, no shot, right? Absolutely no way. So we're like laughing. We think that's, I'm trying to laugh. I can't breathe. And And then this like mother walks up. She's like this third grader. She's like, hey, would you be willing to like race my kid? He is super excited. And we're like, yeah, no, totally. And we both look at each other like, yeah, we should probably let this kid win. And as soon as we start, totally forgot about the kid. I was like, I can't lose to Mark. So yeah, we dusted this child. It tied again, and then we go back to Mark's place, and I have some caffeine to recover, as is my custom, and nearly throw up. So great move.
Good times. Let's go to Kyle Slaby. We're gonna start going. We're gonna start going off the rails now that we've included the story about Arif beating a kid. Kyle Slaby.
That's not. You don't like. We can't organize the sentence like that. You can't say it like that.
And yet here we are. Kyle Slaby asks, for Arif's kicking corner, are the Vikings more likely to miss a field goal wide left if they draft a left-footed kicker?
No, actually, you're a little bit more likely to miss it wide right. Thank you for helping me promote my piece, Kyle. So, piece over from Alex Katzen over at Wide Left about left-footed kickers. They're just, I think the last left-footed kicker to kick in the NFL was David Akers, who, most famously kicked for the Eagles, I think, but also kicked for a number of other teams like the Lions. But Sebastian Janikowski, left-footed kicker, but there just have not been a lot. But if you take a look at the top 20 kickers in like points scored and in most accurate kicking, they're like disproportionate. Like 20% of them are left-footed kickers. Only like 8% of the population. It's very similar to handedness. Only like 8% of the population are like left-footed, right? So like what's the deal? Why are they so good at it, or why is it so rare? And Katzen found out that in the last 17 years, Ben Sauls, the Pittsburgh kicker who's entering this year's draft and is at this year's combine, is the only one who's been invited the last 17 years. And so, which is nuts to me. So yeah, we got a piece over there. It goes into the mechanics of kicking, why it's seemingly so rare, what adjustments you have to make, why it's actually different than a left-handed quarterback and a left-handed center like Creed Humphrey, and why there are some advantages over a left-handed quarterback and some disadvantages versus like a left-handed quarterback. I think it was a really good piece, so you should check it out over at Wide Left. But no, based off of like the way that people set up and stuff like that, I think you're more actually likely to kick it wide right.
Kyle Slaby also asks 2017, the magic ended when Arif tried to argue that the Vikings had a better narrative than the Eagles to Ben Natan.
It's true. Wait, hold on. That's true. They had a much better narrative. That's a way better story than Underdog.
2022's magic ended when James gave away the Laquan Treadwell framed jersey. 2024's magic ended when Don went to Detroit. Which member of the Norse Code Rogues Gallery will ruin our next good season?
Yeah, I think you correctly identified the 2024 problem. 2022, 2017, I don't know. But 2024, I think you nailed it. The next member of the Norse Code Rogues Gallery to ruin... maybe Benjamin Solak, or I think Justice Mosqueda, but that would imply the Packers do something. I kind of don't want that.
No.
Same with like Lauren Cox, right? So we can't have that. Luke Braun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that was the answer staring at us in the face the whole time.
Yeah.
Let us go to R. Menson, who asks, if the 2024-2025 Vikings had to have Arif in their starting lineup, what position would he play and how many wins would he cost the team? He must play offense, defense, or be a primary specialist, and must play a snap percentage for that position, a normal snap percentage. Same question for James as well.
Anyway, we both know the answer to that. I'm a cornerback. We've all seen me.
You're a natural
kill
corner.
It.
Natural
yeah,
corner.
I'm a natural corner. Obviously, with my size, you probably want to move me to linebacker or defensive tackle because I am 7 feet tall.
Yep.
But I think for the most part, given my general athletic skill set, I'd probably be a nickel corner. But yeah, cornerback. And also, look, I just mentioned essentially putting blinders on and being unrealistically competitive as soon as a competition scenario comes up. I will enthusiastically fit the run once. So that's my answer to that.
I mean, my first thought is either tight end or fullback. And
I think athletically, probably fullback, and also spiritually, I feel like you.
I'm a natural fullback. I identify as a fullback.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Of course.
That's absolutely how that works. Also asked is for Arif's Saints rebuild corner. Do you plan on signing Sam Darnold, thinking you can use your strong Vikings connections to help maximize his talents in New Orleans, or do you plan on letting Kellen Moore draft his preferred quarterback, which will likely require trading some capital to move up and get?
All right. So the Saints, I don't know if he's still the running backs coach, but so Joel Thomas, the former New York Giants running backs coach, just last year's Giants running backs coach, was the Saints running backs coach since like 2015. So 2015 to 2023, he had been the Saints running backs coach. He is returning to the Saints. I don't know if he's returning as a running backs coach or as an offensive coordinator, but the reason that's important is because he is bald with a beard of approximately similar length. He has tanned skin relative to white people. And I don't like, the beard consistency is kind of like, it's a black beard. So every time he like shows up on camera, I get a bunch of tweets like, "Hey, Arif, I didn't know you were coaching the Saints." And he was at the Senior Bowl as an offensive coordinator at the Senior Bowl. And a bunch of people said that they did double takes, which is crazy because I don't know if you saw the picture. I think it was Tom Pelissero that Tom Pelissero attached to the tweet breaking the news, but he is yoked up. And so I have to know why people were confused, because it's sure, head up, same deal. Body, totally different. Also, we are different heights. Remember, I'm canonically 7 feet tall, so he's shorter. But, be the process of illusion. Remember Lord of the Rings? The process of illusion, he may look taller most of the time that you see him. So I don't see how that happens. But, anyway, to answer the question, I don't know. I think a lot of teams should probably sign Sam Darnold. I think probably the Raiders are the best shot. But, if I happen to be the offensive coordinator for the Saints, I'm probably letting Kellen Moore figure out his preferred quarterback, or like even more likely, probably just wait on a quarterback. This does not seem like a good draft if you're not picking one or two. And even then, not a great draft for a quarterback.
Let's go to Zen Cupid, who asks, if you bought a grocery store rotisserie chicken and got food poisoning from it, but already made bone broth with the carcass, would you risk using the broth anyway?
Okay.
I mean, technically speaking.
Okay. Here's a couple of thoughts. One, did you eat the rotisserie chicken cold? Is that how you got food poisoning? Two, how confident are you got it from the rotisserie chicken? If the answer to one is that it was still warm, and the answer to two is that you're very confident, then what has happened is that the bacteria in the chicken has produced toxins, and the bacteria will die from heating and reheating and stuff like that. The toxins don't. They just stay there. And so, no, don't use the broth.
No.
But man, that's tough, because making broth from rotisserie chicken is like a time-honored cheat. I'm sorry that you were denied that in this case.
Arif Luenza asks, for Arif's anime corner, what does it mean, both for the community and you personally, now that Super Saiyan 4 is officially canon?
I assume that... Wait, what is officially canon? I assume that Draw Play Dave drew me as Super Saiyan 4? Is that what happened?
I know less about anime than you do. So.
I don't know anything about anime. I don't watch anime.
Well...
Sorry, hold on. So I am to gather that this is from the hit anime series Dragon Ball. I was under the impression.
Now Grok is telling you this, right? Like you're using Grok for this.
Well, I still don't trust AI, so I've been Googling.
Okay, I just wanted to see if you were one of the only people on the planet using Grok. So I just wanted to.
So I was under the impression that this particular leveling system. So there's a power creep system in these kinds of animation programs, where especially, when there's a lot of fighting, although there's a lot of different types of combat from a genre perspective, but specifically in battle and combat, it can be represented by power level or whatever. And so you sometimes you get numbers. And so there's a very popular meme that I've recently learned from Googling, where this guy, I think his name is Vegeta, says his power level is over 9,000, right? So there's a numerical, value attached to the amount of power that you have. That quickly gets broken. It's useless. It gets broken as hell. It's pointless. It's not helpful. So they then kind of graduate into these different levels of what are called Super Saiyan. And what happens is that characters, my understanding is that they're like aliens. They're not human. They look human, but they're not. Some of these characters are aliens, and only the aliens can transform from like one form to another. And at first it was a really hype moment. Oh my God, you're a Super Saiyan, like a yellow glow, your hair changes color. It's great. And then I guess 2, there's a Super Saiyan 2 or whatever, and that's a whole deal, and it looks a little bit different. And then 3, I think your hair gets super long and you lose your eyebrows. I don't know. Maybe in Super Saiyan 2 you're blue. I don't know. But Super Saiyan 4 I thought was always a thing. And after Googling, it sounds like it just happened 4 days ago in Dragon Ball Super? I don't know. And it's a whole deal where it's not just a different color, but like it's a red, but also you get fur. So I guess these guys are monkeys too. Anyway, when I Googled it, I got is SSJ4, which I understand to be Super Saiyan 4. Is Super Saiyan 4 or God stronger? So this program has jumped the shark, is what I've learned.
Wow. So that's what the power level 9,000 was all about?
Yeah, well, they had a numerical system for relative power levels among the characters, which I think is actually a really poor idea, narratively speaking, because it kind of saps a lot of the tension from fights. But my understanding is that the way that this creator used the system is that it was like a lot of subversion, and so you'd end up with a protagonist actually beating someone with a higher number, which you're understood in the narrative of the show to be virtually impossible. So really creative kind of storytelling, but generally speaking, not great to just say this guy using our objective system in our combat related entertainment is just objectively stronger. Not wonderful writing, in my opinion. But they subverted it.
That's a lot of information that you're getting just from that, like that one article that you're looking at that you're looking at that with no background.
There's a lot of great explainers on the internet if you know how to Google. Like I know Google has gotten a lot worse.
And you're sure you're not using Grok for this?
Yeah, no, I absolutely am not using Grok. If I was going to use an AI, it would be the one that spies on me from China instead of from Cupertino. Yeah.
The one that doesn't know anything about Tiananmen Square. But
yeah, that one. Yeah.
That. I found some some extension in Chrome that makes Twitter look like it did like 5 years ago. With like in regards to like the additional like information, like it removes Grok, it removes all this other stuff. It's like, oh my God, this is so much better. Like this is perfect. I love this.
Like I have tried turning off the AI overview in my searches for so long.
Yep.
And it never like there's a little switch and you turn it off and it doesn't do jack. It does nothing at all.
No.
And I keep on getting AI overviews, and You get an answer, and then the answer, you're supposed to trust the answer because it links to where it got it from. And then you click the link. And I got to say, 25% of the time, that link says nothing like what the AI fed in, which is an insanely high error rate for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's a whole deal, whatever. But
this is what you've learned over the years from being a Grok user. I get it.
God, why is this a thing? Did the Discord make me a Grok user? Like, what? How is this coming up?
This has always been canon. Arif's 8th grade crush ends this episode with
oh my God.
Question for Arif's business corner. What should I wear to my fundraising work event on Thursday night? Now, if you dress too well, people are not going to be interested in giving you money. But if you dress too poorly, they may also be. Will they be more inspired by your poor dress? Like, you clearly need this money.
Yeah, but like, also you're not professional. Yeah.
There's a very thin line here.
If you're truly my 8th grade crush, then if that is your real name, then the answer to this question, I don't even know why you'd ask this. The answer to this question is what you always wore in middle school and high school, which is a pair of cat ears and an attachable cattail, which doesn't make me look good, but that's where we are.
Some new lore just dropped.
Look,
I think this officially takes the heat off of me for dating a furry. Yeah, I think this works.
Okay, not a furry, first of all.
No, I don't
costume.
Care. I do not
they're
care.
Not, like, inside, they're not wearing a mascot costume.
No, I do not.
Grade.
This is the sound of me not caring. This is me.
I didn't actually go through the dating process. In fact, you've heard the story. You know I never dated this person.
Again, the sound of me not caring. This is me exhaling that now I can push this out as a narrative. Oh, this is perfect. Oh,
they're not a furry. They're not a furry.
This is the best way this episode could have ended. Arif, that is the end of this episode of Norse Code. What do you have to plug?
Cliff, I'm going to find. No. I can't believe this. Over at Why Left Out Football, you can find the most recent article, which was written by Alex Katzen about left-footed kickers. You can also find my piece on the Shrine Bowl, the senior game. I also recently wrote pieces about the economic benefits of hosting the Super Bowl, or maybe the lack of economic benefits in hosting the Super Bowl. I read through a bunch of studies written by economists about this question. And I also wrote about the fact that, you can kind of use Super Bowl commercials, separate article, you can use Super Bowl commercials to kind of identify which companies are like burning money. And so I talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and how much I hate large language models like Grok, as an example, just throwing that one out there. And then my most recent article is we're about to go to the combine. You heard the whole interview. Is about whether or not media identified combine snubs are actually combine snubs, whether or not they tend to overperform versus other non-invited combine snubs. Or non-snub, non-combine invites. So check that out. There's a lot of pieces over at Why Left Out Football. I'm trying to publish 1-2 pieces a week, even though it's the off season. Also, like if you're confused, you should Google the definition of a furry. And that's so you to understand that that's not.
And with that, that's me the end of this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back likely after the combine to discuss how everything went and what Arif ended up eating. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the horrors persist, and so do we. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.